started with our workshop today. And before we do that, obviously, we've had we in the county have had a tragedy occur to one of our deputies last night. If we could go ahead and put Deputy Magley's picture on the screen, please. Deputy Magley was 30 years old and was killed in the line of duty, protecting us while trying to stop a drunk driver along East Lake Road. Obviously, out there protecting people trying to get home after work. He's survived by his wife and 2 children and family. He's been with the sheriff's office since 2013. He graduated from the police academy in 2014, and he's been working on patrol duty in North County since then. So really, on behalf of all of us here, we wanted to extend our condolences and sympathies to his wife and his 2 kids, his family, his friends, and also his sheriff department family. This is truly a sad day in Pinellas County, and we just wanted to make sure that we pause just for a minute to express our deepest sympathies. And so I want to just go ahead and take a moment of silence to reflect on Deputy Magley and his family, saying thank you for his service and dedication to all of our residents. Thank you. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, just 1 second, real quick. I just have one other comment. I'd asked Barry this morning to place the flags at half-staff today and on the day of his internment. There's some pretty strict protocols at the state level for this, and so with your all's concurrence, I'm just going to send a letter to the governor and ask for him to extend that for the week from today through the date of his internment. I just want to make sure that we follow protocol, but I just want to make sure that everybody nodding their heads here this morning that I can do that, and we'll send a letter immediately to that effect. So thank you for that. Yes, Commissioner Long.
Thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Chair. I would like to remind the Commission and the rest of the folks here that this is exactly the reason why Commissioner Maroney established his annual event for first responders and law enforcement, and why the Maroney Legacy Foundation was created. So please keep him and his soul in your prayers as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So we'll get that letter out today and get it up to him. So we want to go ahead and make sure that we don't, move the flags tomorrow. So let's get that, if we can get that done.
We'll prepare that immediately.
Okay, thank you. Okay, well, we'll get started with our meeting. First part of this meeting is for the Commissioner Space Facility Update. Barry, go ahead.
That's correct. As you recall earlier, last year we began a process to evaluate our space options, and evaluate our facilities. Up until that time, and as you know, we've kind of made do with space. People are kind of scattered all over, and so we wanted to evaluate the space. They're in the process of collecting information from the various departments and agencies and consolidating that, and then they'll bring back some ideas and recommendations at a later date. However, part of that is, being a department of your own is the Board of Commissioners offices, and so they're seeking input from you. But I also wanted them to have a chance to meet with you. You can ask any questions. They can tell you where they're at in the process. Because it needs to be an iterative process as we go through this before we actually make recommendations regarding where we go and what type of changes we would propose to make, as we get further along in this process. So, Joe, if you want to introduce it, or Andrew, I guess Andrew's standing up. So Andrew will introduce the consultants, and they can kind of explain where they're at and how we can collect the appropriate information.
Good morning, Commissioners. Andrew Pupke, Division Director with Administrative Services. The item before you, as the Administrator said, is a Space Needs Assessment interview, which is intended to solicit the full Commission's input on information that was provided by Commissioner Eggers to the Space Needs Consultant Stantec back in January, specifically related to the commission offices in the 315 courthouse. The Stantec interview team is going to be joining us virtually. So at this time, I would like to introduce Sydney Hamilton with Stantec, who is going to lead off the interview process.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me to join you. I'm going to share my screen.
There's the team.
So briefly, this is the information we're going to cover this morning. We'll make some brief introductions of our team. We'll do a quick overview of the project and where we are in the project process. And then we'll discuss your specific space needs. And if there's time, we might get into some overall county information. My team today, I'm joined by Brett Sherman on the phone. He's leading the project overall, and he's our real estate expert. Amy Tabor is helping me with the planning effort and the programming. Eric Grau is our project manager, and Michael is not joining us on the call, but he led the effort to assess the physical facility conditions. This is a description of our project process. We have two concurrent tasks. The first is the programming and alternatives development process. We are currently in this data collection phase here. We are just gathering all the information we can from all the departments to understand what space you have and how you're using it and how it's working and not working for you. And then concurrently with that, task 2 involves assessing the building conditions and evaluating the real estate options for your eventual needs. And as Andrew mentioned, I believe this is a 10-year plan, so we're looking at 10-year needs down the road. We did receive from Commissioner Eggers and some information about your current space in the 315 building. We understand that you all had a chance to review and provide input on that. So the basic understanding from that is that you want to maintain the type of office space that you have with a similar configuration, possibly in a new location. We understand that you have some additional new requirements related to meeting and breakout space, your lobby and reception areas, and some tech upgrades. And then we understand that you have a request for some satellite workspace in north, south, and mid-county locations. And we wanted to understand if there are any remote implications, if any, long-term, and then talk a little bit about that request for the satellite locations. And with that, I'll open it up to the commissioners if you want to provide some input on any of the information that you have already provided to us.
Yeah, just before we do that, I noticed on your timeline you've checked off. I'm hearing an echo. It's bad enough to hear my voice on tape. I don't like to hear it at the same time I'm speaking. Hello? All right, that's better. Anyway, we have a startup and then visioning. So I don't know who was involved in the visioning piece. I guess, you know.
Everybody. So we have representatives from all the various department constitutional officers, appointing authorities. So everybody made appointments to this process, and that's the team that's going through that, you know, piece by piece.
Yeah.
And I'll just jump in as well, Commissioner. The things checked off there are what we have completed so far. So we went through a kickoff process, and we conducted a visioning workshop with the steering committee that is a continuity throughout all phases of the project.
Just asking you, I'd listened to it. I've been to a couple of meetings in recent weeks where they've talked about, you know, this new way of doing work, this remote aspect that's been introduced, so to speak, in the last year during this pandemic. They're talking about, you know, the millennial groups and I guess the next group after the millennials being, you know, having that interest in working more from home. And we're going to be competing for their talents for sure. As I'm not sure what our age group, our average age is probably over 50 here. And so we'll be looking to replace folks that young. Are you seeing any of those types of trends that are kind of requirements for employment almost from some of the younger generations that we need to be aware of as we go through this planning process?
Yeah, I would say it is no longer a trend. It is very much something that is happening across the private and public sector, and it is no longer a generational aspect. This is something that all working generations we are finding now that we know it works for most knowledge work types, which I'll say knowledge workers are, the ones that tend to be more computer based. There are certain jobs that cannot be done remotely. The fleet maintenance group cannot do their work from the living room, right? They have to be in person. But depending on the type of work, if the work supports it, we are finding that it will be a factor moving forward in attraction and retention of employees, and you will be competing with that as a benefit, essentially, for private and public sector work.
And just a general comment, how do you see that affecting, again, not necessarily specifically in our case, but just in general, how do you see that affecting the design of spaces for employees? In other words, maybe they once were going to have an office, but now because they're not here as much, that we're moving more towards bullpen setup, so it's a little bit more flexible, maybe flexible use, more than one person in a desk kind of thing, depending on when they come in. Any of those kinds of things that you're seeing also?
Absolutely, that's a great observation. So it depends a little on the type of work. If the work involves a need for confidentiality, we might still be providing private offices, or we might provide a flexible option where there's a private space that can be accessed for those conversations, depending on the frequency of that need. We are investigating each individual department's specific needs and even the subdivision specific needs to understand that, again, there's not a one silver bullet solution that will work for every work type. Certain departments have different personalities, and then certain leadership is going to require different styles. So we want to make sure that we accommodate different needs. We're also going to be planning to a bit of a range so that we understand if everyone goes to the remote work option that they think would work best for them, here's what the space need would look like. If there was more of a status quo, return to whatever normal is going to look like after the pandemic, here's what the space need is going to be. And we'll have a range so that the county can understand a bit of a roadmap without being hemmed into any specific,
Okay.
And Commissioner, if I could add, we put this project on hold when COVID-19 hit because we understood that work was going to change, and we were also going to learn where you could do work remotely and where there's an impact to work by doing it remotely. So that's part of that evaluation process we've been working through now for 9 months or 10 months. And so we actually slowed this down to where we'd be better able to respond to the consultants' needs and questions regarding options and things that we could do differently.
Yeah, and I guess some of those questions we'll start dealing with. I didn't want to get too broad-based here today. We're just talking mostly about our space today.
We wanted to give you an overview of where we're at overall, and then see if there's any specific questions you have about your space, or in general where trends or where we're going. We're still trying to figure that out. Yeah. I will tell you, there are areas where I think having people remote is the right thing to do, but it has an impact on work. Because there's not the collaboration. Just because you can do something outside, if you're not interacting with people in the department, in between departments, you lose, a knowledge transfer and a shared approach. So there's some things that we have to evaluate internally as we go through this process too. But there's certainly more that you can do remotely, and that's what we're struggling with. Yeah,
in the traditional sense, everybody has a place to call home when they come to work. They have their own desk, they have their own spot, So are we going to, is it going to be different now? Are we going to have a bullpen area where people can come in and work, occasionally when they come in for that group
I think
meeting?
You're going to see more of that. I do think you're going to see more of that. I think we're going to have internal management discussions about where that works. And frankly, you also have different managers that feel differently, about how they approach that. So there'll be a lot of discussions, because our employees may feel differently than the managers too.
Yeah.
And so those some internal things that it's going to take us a little time to work through.
Yeah, and when we have those discussions, make sure that we have a nice age-diversified group talking, because sometimes, from my perspective, it's a different perspective than a young 25, 30-year-old. It's looking to either get into the workforce or it's looking for a new place. So it's nice to have
Right.
all of those thoughts, because this is obviously a multi-generational planning effort, because it's not going to happen just for 20 years. This is a facility that would theoretically be around for a long time. Commissioner Long, go ahead.
Did you have your hand up first, right?
I was talking, I wasn't observing, so go ahead. Go ahead, Commissioner Long.
Okay, well, what I thought might be kind of interesting, and I don't know, Barry, if you've I think you have, gone over to tour that new building in downtown Clearwater. I think it's called The Ring. Mm-hmm. Yeah? I found it incredibly insightful when they talked about the work that had gone on before they built that building and designed it the way they did, because they took all of this kind of conversation into consideration. And I think there's a lot to be learned from looking and going and touching and feeling and seeing what they've created there in terms of what we might be able to create that would be innovative and futuristic and last for a long, long time. Mm-hmm. Because they took all of that. Have you been there?
Yes, oh yeah, it's great.
I think it's just really worthwhile listening to them.
Mm-hmm. And that was a small business, private sector, executive suites on steroids. It really was amazing. But they did provide different outlets for folks to come into work. Some was individual offices, some was a bullpen area. They had access to large conference rooms and a lot of breakout small conference room. So there was a number of opportunities for the way each business was going to conduct their business. And so it's just, again, I think that's the conversation that you're talking about.
And I was particularly struck by the resiliency and sustainability efforts that they took in the wall that had all that touchy-feely stuff on it that, just, I don't know, it just really appealed to the senses in terms of keeping an overall healthy work environment. So just wanted to put that on the table.
Yeah, that was another element. You're right. There was a different kind of more of a
different
relaxed
mindset,
environment, but still getting work done. So, yeah, Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When we went, everyone kind of left the offices earlier last year. I thought you said that we had something like 600 employees working from home out of the 2,000, give or take. Is that?
It sounds right. I forget the exact number, but it was a significant amount of people.
And so, I guess and I know it's a little bit here on the timeline, but just so when will we anticipate having that data back from those managers and taking into account that just because the current manager loves everyone working at home, or the current manager doesn't like that once is old school, wants everyone in, that it's got to be a structurally more permanent setting to where the people fit into it, not necessarily we're locked in just because, Manager Smith was there in 2021 and made that decision kind of thing.
So we definitely need stronger policies regarding how we do this and to be consistent, across the organization. And that's something that we're currently working on. So it's got to be done in conjunction with this space planning process. But that also goes to then trying to evaluate each unique set of work and how that person interacts with others or doesn't, or how exactly do they accomplish that? It can be very different, even though it has a like title between departments in terms of their need to be, physically in there and interact with others or not. Permit areas, you could set and do certain things, remotely, but there are certain things that the team needs to come together to be able to review. Or can you do that by teams now? And so I think that's a lot of what we're learning, literally real time, just like you're talking about here, and we hope to use Stantec to help us with bringing some of these policies into the way in which we design futuristic space.
Commissioner Seal?
Thank you. There's other areas where they've done this co-working space too. The station house down in St. Pete was one of the very first ones to open up in Pinellas County, and it's very similar to the Ring. There's a couple of other co-working spaces in St. Pete. Armature Works over in Tampa has done some co-working space as well. So I look forward to seeing what the new model looks like. And then the other thing, this is sort of on the same subject, but Mr. Chairman, at some point I'd like to have a discussion of how and when our offices are going to open back up
Okay, well, I think
and
that's,
what that's going to look like, because I do think that there is, offices are starting to be populated across the county again, and we've got to kind of figure that out, because I think there is some need for coordination and so on within our offices.
agreed.
Thank you.
Agreed. Commissioner Flowers?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm really grateful for the discussion because that gives us an opportunity also to address retention. When you are out recruiting new team members, and sometimes from a different age bracket, what's appealing is either the option to work completely remotely or a hybrid where you're both. So that would be really good. But I also want us to remain ever cautious because we know how some trends kind of turn on a dime and they change. And I would hate for us to downsize our in space so much that if we grew, then now we've got to look at other options for where we could place people now or a new facility. So we're looking at spending a couple of dollars. I've been a part of some teams where we did that. We kind of shrunk our operations. More persons were working remotely. It saved money and all of that. But then when some other opportunities came, we now had to go out and find some space because those opportunities required in-person connection. So I think this is a really good discussion, and just having that option. I was just sharing, I am a little leery sometimes in certain departments for shared space because of the nature of the documents that you handle and what you do. Yeah. And you may not intend to leave a document behind, but accidentally some things happen, and that could cause a whole myriad of concerns when you're talking about breach of confidentiality and things of that nature. Simply leaving something on a copier that has somebody's date of birth and social security number could turn into a real big situation. So just want to be mindful of things like that, when we're looking at shared space.
And we are in a very fortunate place. There are some places that have done designs for a new building, and now they're like, what do we do now? Do we redesign? Do we, think through this? So, we're in almost like the perfect place to be having the conversation. In fact, we might even get to a point where we just say, after a year worth of work, let's pause for another year before we take action, because we just kind of like to see things unfold. Yeah. To your point about trends, they're saying it's not just a trend anymore, but I do understand what you're meaning. The pendulum swings a little bit. We want to make sure we don't do too much. Commissioner Gerard.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. You were
and
finished.
just Commissioner Seal, thank you for mentioning the station house. There's also Rising Tide, which is a shared workspace. I had a chance to visit that place. It is absolutely gorgeous and is really cost effective and utilizes a lot of the green factors for saving energy. And any other places, Clear Labs, and that's more technical, computeristic things. So some people are doing it, and it's really neat.
Yeah. Thank you. Commissioner Gerard?
Yeah, I guess I'm having a hard time figuring out where I am because of what you just said. It's like we're in the middle of a sea change, I think, in terms of workspace and working remotely and all that. And we've done it, but how far back are we going to go to being in the office? I was saying before this meeting, I probably haven't been in the office for any length of time more than a half a dozen times in the last 10 months. Seriously. Because you can't meet anybody there, obviously we know in a normal world, people want to meet with us and they want to meet in groups and they will want to meet face to face again. But I'm willing to let it play out for a little bit longer to see what our real needs are in terms of the commission, but also in terms of the rest of the staff. Do we have the I think it takes a lot more managerial and supervisory skill
to supervise people that aren't right in front of you? And do we have that skill set yet? I'm sure we do in some places and maybe not as much in other places, so. Yeah, I think we don't need to be in a huge hurry about this because things are changing.
Yeah, teachers
And I
are-
think, I don't know, and I also wanted to mention, you talk about environmentally wonderful spaces. It's also environmentally wonderful to not get in your car and drive across the county to go to a meeting for a half an hour. And then drive to the other end of the county to go to another meeting. So I'm gonna be, I mean, I have a little more challenge transporting than you do, but I'm going to be doing as many things, Zooming and teaming as I can, because I think it's an excellent way to get a group of people together, especially busy people. So, yeah.
Commissioner Lowe?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To your point, Commissioner Gerard, I think before we move forward on any deep dive discussion about what we're going to look like, it's almost more important in my mind to figure out what area of the county are we focusing on? Are we still going to focus on downtown Clearwater? Are we going to try to make it more available and easy to get to in maybe a mid-county location? I mean, I know for a lot of people, I started having a satellite office and a Panera Bread just so they didn't have to come all the way into downtown Clearwater, because the time constraint adds another few hours of your day if you're coming from South St. Pete or maybe over from Tampa. Just FYI, I'm sure everybody else has the same constraints.
So the first thing we are trying to do, though, is look at the synergies of how work gets done. Okay, we can, location is important, and we will look at location, but there are certain synergies of things that go together, things that can be done, maybe in two locations to make it more accessible to people versus things that need to be centralized. A permit center, for instance, you don't need to go through high security, but in our facility, you would want security, or a human services group. Okay, so you've got different types of functions, and so part of that is trying to figure out, where, what goes together and how best to get the most efficient operation. And then we can then start looking at, can it be done in two locations versus one central location and things like that. And so all that will come together. It's just going to be, a piece at a time. The other reason I wanted to get some initial data on what that looks like for at least discussion is that I would imagine that we're going to see what happens in the corporate office market over the next year. And there may be opportunities rather than build to buy, at a good price. And so I don't know that opportunity is going to present itself. I don't even know, but if I don't know what the space kind of looks like, at least at a macro level, then I wouldn't have an opportunity to act on anything that came open. So this is going to have to be an iterative process. We've got a lot of things to do internally. If I have people working remotely, well, then I've got policies and procedures on how to manage that workforce. We're used to, you come in at 8:30 and you leave at 5, and but as one of my managers said, but just because they're in there doesn't mean that if you're not in their office, you know exactly what they're doing. And so we've got to set policies and procedures up. If they're working remotely, are they working 8 to 5, or are they working noon to 8? Or things like that, because then we're accountable to the public. And if the person's out golfing in the morning, are they loafing, or do they have an alternative work schedule? I mean, there's a lot of things internally we have to be able to manage too. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it's doing things different. And that's what we're all trying to learn from. But there's a lot of pieces that we're going to be putting in place simultaneously with the space plan that'll govern how we do that work. But there is no question about it, in some areas, and we've been dealing with this for a while, that is a piece to attracting talent and having, some flexibility within that.
Yeah. Commissioner Justice?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I guess I'm maybe take a little different tact. I don't want us to hit the pause button on this too long, because one, we've been talking for years about what the condition of our building is, and what the real life is on those windows. I mean, that was kind of what started this whole conversation several years ago, was the windows. I mean, we're on the 5th floor. I can hear conversations at street level of people walking by. I can want to, interact with them on the street. So there's at some point where that becomes a real thing. It is nice being able to go from meeting to meeting without leaving your room, but with the sunshine and the governor's not letting those meetings happen anymore, that's still not a solution unless they change it at the state level. We're only talking about a percentage of employees that are in this category. We're not talking about the fleet or the parks or the people that are out, So I guess I don't see it. Yeah. I do understand the mindset's changing and the recruiting of new employees, certainly in some of those departments, but I don't see it as much of a sea change for government work as maybe some of the others is all, I guess. But I do like the idea that we should take a look at what is available in the corporate real estate market. That's what Hillsborough County did. Now, they had a whole different kind of thing than what I think we would be looking at. But and I do like what Commissioner Long talked about as far as whether it's the commission office and assembly room or the permitting and all those direct services, but certainly evaluating every location to make it more convenient to folks. And downtown Clearwater at some points is not the most convenient place if you're coming from Eastlake or if you're coming from St. Petersburg. So I think all those things, and so I'm kind of more chomping at the bit to get going on this thing. So.
Me too.
Well, I certainly think the conversations that we've had, some of the comments that have been made, is not about stopping what we're doing. I think the process needs to continue. We've got a lot of work to be done, and at some point there's going to be some critical jump-offs to make decisions. We get that. So, I think, your point about the real estate market, the good news and bad news is that, there's going to be less demand for office, but we haven't had a lot of office space built in this county, new office space built. So there's not going to be a glut of it anyway, but I think it doesn't hurt to look at that. The idea of making it more accessible and to our residents, whether it's the location of the building or how you get into the building or where the actual chambers or the assembly hall is it first floor? Who wants to share the space with the commissioners? Administration or some other department, because we're going to be on a floor. Where does it make sense? How do we, work better together? Those are conversations we'll be having. This morning, I was still open to any of those comments. We're not closing it off here, but this morning, are you wanting us to give you like pieces of feedback on our space itself? So you can use that in your...
You certainly can. I think this morning there was a question regarding where's the commissioner's opportunity for input into this process.
Yeah.
And we said, okay, well, first let's back up and let's have the consultants come and talk to you directly. If you want to say, I want you thinking about planning for, we only have one conference room, we really, it's insufficient, or any of those other things, then you can provide that as a commission. You can provide that independently, however you want to do that. And then, again, you're going to see this many more times before we're asking to take action as we kind of bring the different pieces together. But I do want to I think you'd be surprised at the number of buildings that we own. And we have rented office space. We have buildings that are houses, and there are, my own budget staff is over in a utilities building, and we have a lot of space throughout the county. You did that with the courts. The courts, it's pretty straightforward. You've got a Central, you've got a St. Pete, you've got that. You kind of did that consolidation process with that. We just didn't do it with the other general county government offices. And so, I think it's similar to what you went through with that here.
Yeah, I was glad to hear that we had a roster of properties that are just land properties that are out there that we need to have conversation about because it's ridiculous. And then also buildings that, like as you talk about, that are just scattered all over with people in them, and how does that work? And we could put a lot of space back on the market, frankly, and consolidate at the same time. So
I agree. And again, I think you can gain, I mean, how do you pay for a building? You get more efficient and you eliminate 4 vacancies by having one, front counter person versus 4. And believe it or not, that adds up real quick, and it's not, you do it through attrition, you do it through planning, but I'm just saying there's ways of saving a lot of money by looking at the design of your space.
Well, I certainly think that, obviously ours is a relationship business, and satellite offices, I think, are a good idea if there are places that have that availability with partners, or, like the place, like Spot and Layleman, for instance, down at the center down there, maybe we can, up in Palm Harbor or down in, St. Petersburg, we can find an office to do that so that we can continue having these relationships. But I think we still have 7 offices. Now I did hear them over there talking in Hillsborough County about, do we need to plan for 9 offices? Like there might be 9 commissioners at some point. And I'm thinking, my gosh, no. So I'm thinking 7 offices with 7 offices with their assistants, the way it's set up now, maybe more breakout rooms, a large conference room that we can meet, and maybe have a larger one that can be, an accordion in the middle. It can kind of split up 2 sizes, a little storage, a little, and a nice reception area. It all is in context with the building itself and how accessible the building is, and where is there security issues? Do we employ those security issues? And it's a whole list of things. But as far as our space is concerned, maybe that's where we can get a little feedback this morning to help at least move that process along, even though we may come back to it and amend it or change it or whatever. So I don't know if anybody had any distinct thoughts. Commissioner Flowers?
It just crossed my mind. Yesterday, I was at a PSTA planning meeting, and I support efficiency, but something a gentleman said yesterday just kind of rung in my ear. A lot of people think of our building as the county seat. So we may hear from the community some attachment to the location of that building and the services there, because for so many years, people have considered that like the heart of the county. So I'm just sharing, it just hit me, a gentleman did refer to our building as that on yesterday, and so anyway.
Well, there's actually 2 points on that, if I can add. First, you do have an active court in our building, okay? That's attached to our building. And so so we have the courts involved in that, because that would take planning. There are attorneys that access that, maybe have their offices there, et cetera, and stuff. So that's a factor in that. 2, you have a historic courthouse that is designated, so you're not moving that, and so we've got to deal with that. And then lastly, if you move out of the city of Clearwater, that requires a referendum. So yes, and so
there may be some options we can talk through on that, but the city of Clearwater is the county seat legally under the charter. It was adopted in 1911 or 12, I believe. That said, there are some statutory provisions. To change the county seat from Clearwater does require referendum, but there is some statutory processes where you can potentially expand the county seat outside of the city limits. So there's a lot of granularity in there that I don't really think we need to dig into at this moment, but there are some potential options.
But we did, just so you know, we have discussed this with the city of Clearwater. So, this isn't a surprise. We're going to do this in conjunction with them.
But to your point, there is an infrastructure of private sector that is built up around courthouses.
Yeah, and to what degree? Because it's just a civil court down there. I don't know the answer to that. That'll be part. I was kind of making you aware that that's part of this process that we need to review. There's several other types of decisions to that point that we have to consider as part of this process.
Well, we need to have those meetings when justice isn't available, because obviously...
And that's already occurring. That's already occurring.
You want my vacation schedule?
Commissioner Justice, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll send you my vacation schedule so you can
We'll do that.
plan. I think the chairman's comments as far as the actual needs of the 5th floor are spot on. I think not a lot of dramatic change. I personally would like to see a physical layout change to where it's not a bowling alley kind of thing, more of a U shape and a bullpen in the middle where the reception. I think that we're missing that kind of human interaction a little bit, COVID notwithstanding. So I think that just from a design element. The satellite offices, I think, I know Commissioner Welch used it. I used it. The Exchange office is a great setup right off of 275 at 54th there. But I'm sure the city of St. Pete, Palm Harbor, Erica has offered space there. So there's opportunities for theirs without a lot of capital investment. But someone brought up security. I think that is going to be a key issue as far as the design elements of who goes where. And at some point, I think it's time. We haven't done it in a while. We haven't done a security shade meeting to talk about security of the commission and assembly room and all those kind of things. And I think that would be at some point appropriate just for an update. And we have new commissioners that may or may not have gone through some of those same things. So I throw that to the attorney's office that at some point I would like a security shade, just an update and briefing that we've done before. And then, yeah, the historic courthouse is not going anywhere, but that's just one piece of the property. Again, I'm not saying we should do one thing. I think I just don't want us to limit our options. Yeah. And as far as the county seat, we have county services all over the county. So I don't know what is the county seat definition of what has to be there because we've got our public security building in Largo. We've got other spaces around the county in different cities and unincorporated areas. So, and just to throw this into the mix, I wanted to mention it back in November, but I didn't want to mention it outside of Sunshine, was when we had a certain meeting at the historic courthouse, I kept looking around that room thinking it would be a beautiful commission assembly room. And if the judges aren't attached to that facility, instead of a brand new facility, that historic courthouse could have been an option for these commissioners assembly room, et cetera. So just throwing that out there.
Commissioner Steele, I'll get you.
Now that's thinking out of the box. That's an interesting idea. I agree with trying to create satellite offices. Thank you, Commissioner Flowers, for recognizing the county seat, and I know Commissioner Justice had asked for information before. I believe it takes 2 public hearings and spaced apart. I can't remember all the details, but I do think that there is some sentiment for keeping something in some part of the city limits of Clearwater, again, because it is central to all of the county. If you think about it, if we go to St. Pete, then that's not central to Eastlake. If we go to Eastlake, then it's not central for St. Pete. So we've got to be sensitive, I think, to all of those things. So, but I used the St. Pete office when we used to have it as well for meetings, and I do think that there is a good rationale for maybe using space that we already have for us to be able to have satellite meetings if need be. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, just a follow-up question. Yeah. And I guess the question for the attorneys is, as we do get more into the county seat issue, is what county function has to exist in the county seat? Is it the commission meetings or the administrator's office? So that was the question that Ms. White and I went back and forth on, and we never really got to a final landing spot. But obviously, our county services are all over. So, and again, I have no interest in moving that out of Clearwater. And Clearwater is not just downtown Clearwater; it stretches quite far out.
Did you follow?
Yeah, just one more thing that I forgot. I would hope that Stantec would also engage. There were some people from the private sector who might be interested in our footprint, and so it might be worth talking to the development community to see if there's some way to repurpose everything but the old courthouse and really.
I don't have that as a task for Stantec, but I'm well aware of that after we figure out what type of space we're looking for, and if that would free up existing space, then we would engage that as a secondary process.
Okay.
Yeah,
but absolutely agree with you.
There is no question in this county that land is at a premium. So, yeah, they could easily repurpose our property. And we'll just have to figure out if and when and all that. Commissioner Long?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm a bit intrigued by Charlie's thought process about using the old courthouse. And I guess my question about that is, when I first came on the commission, I remember a deep dive discussion with former Administrator LaSala about the necessity of having a new building, and he went through an entire list of all of the reasons why, and that the one we're in now was just not able to be refurbished to the standards of today, especially as it especially as it related to technology and to heating and air conditioning, not to mention the windows that need to be replaced, the siding on the building, et cetera, et cetera. And so I'm kind of wondering, given that the old courthouse is older than the building we're in, if some of those same issues wouldn't apply there.
Part of Stantec's work is to do a facility assessment, and there's very specific ways in which you do facility assessment to determine whether it's past its useful life, whether it's more cost-effective to build new versus rehabbing. So that is included within their task list.
Are there any other, maybe before we kind of leave the conversation, and I did want to circle back to your comment in the beginning about coming back to the office and that kind of discussion, but is there any other comment as it relates to our floor dynamics that anybody wants to give Stantec at this point? Just other than what I may have mentioned, I just want to make sure that we've captured any of those thoughts. Yes, Commissioner Gerard.
Just to agree with Commissioner Justice, we're all agreeing with you today.
That's
About
scary.
no bowling alleys and, you know, the distance between one office and the one on the other end.
Yeah.
is not real conducive to interaction. Let's just put it that way. But yes, we do need a bigger conference room, and maybe more than one at a time.
Yeah.
But also meeting room in our offices. That's really important.
The size of our offices aren't enough?
I think they're fine now, but if you have 3 or 4 or 5 people, you've got to get a conference room, and
Yeah.
you know, that one, the one we have is not
The
great
one we have
for
is
meetings,
horrible.
and it doesn't hold a whole lot more than 6
No.
or 8, so.
So a couple more huddle rooms,
Yeah.
bigger, and then maybe a
Yeah.
larger conference room, a
But-
couple more
But-
smaller conference
But our
rooms.
offices can accommodate 4 people around a table, so to speak. So
Right.
if you're going to do the smaller conference room, which I think is a good idea, it needs to be a little bit bigger than
Right.
that. Otherwise, we just stay in
Well,
our
10
office.
people.
Yeah, maybe, and then maybe another one where you have a large area where it
Right.
can be split into, maybe 2
Right.
good size or one big room.
Right.
So we don't have to go to the 4th floor to do a meeting.
I mean, part of their task list, so you also know, is for them to look at government buildings around the country. How
Yeah.
have others
Yeah.
set up? Council chambers, they all have work session spaces and technology and different things like that. So they will be bringing back kind of, best practices too.
And I just, storage and I'm assuming that, we could, we're a paper product. We're moving away from paper products, right? But we have these, we have these, I don't know, we have all these storage places in our own offices, and we have a supply room, but we don't have a storage room, like
Right.
for, maybe we have a small storage room. Again, there's some of the storage we need to keep, some of it handy, some of it we need to be able to send, to get rid of. I don't know. Anyway, something to think about, maybe some kind of storage facility. The only other thing I was going to ask, it's not being used now, but we still equip it, I guess, as a reporter's room where they come in and they can come in and access our emails and all of that kind of thing. Are you all? I don't even mean that, but where press can stay during a meeting if they need to. That kind of piece will be added into the thought process too.
Well, they're taking notes from your comments,
Okay.
and they can certainly make sure,
Okay.
You have things like that for,
Yeah.
and I do believe, you make it more accessible where people
Yeah.
coming in now. I mean, used to be people come in, you had to have a computer available. Well, now they're all laptop, they're all live, anywhere, anytime. So there's probably some changes to that, but
Yeah.
they're taking notes from
Yeah,
everything you guys are saying.
There was a time, it's not too long ago, we had a plan that didn't work because of the age of our building. You probably had to bring dynamite to break the wall down, but we were talking about building a wall, an area in the back of our
Yes.
assembly room where we could put the press during meetings, but also it could be a meeting room when it's not, and it couldn't happen because of codes probably.
Fire
Yeah.
sprinkler issues. You do an expansion back there into space, and that triggers all kinds of other issues and very expensive.
Yeah, but when we have, and I don't mean for our building, but I'm just saying for the new, when we have flexible use of space, I think is
Yes.
obviously, I'm sure that's what they do for a living, but,
Correct.
okay. Anything else before we move on? So I guess we can get back to
So
the
a lot
Stantec
there.
folks.
We'll be, this isn't, we'll have more more substantive stuff in the future, but at least wanted to introduce it, get some of your initial thoughts, and then we'll be back to you soon. But we are moving in earnest on this, and so, you'll see this, coming up.
Do they, are
soon.
they still on with us, and do they have any other?
I'm sure they are. They can certainly close it out
Yeah.
if they wish.
Yeah, please, go ahead and close out your presentation. If you have any other general comments or questions, it would be welcome.
Sure, thank you. I did just want to address, all the comments that I'm hearing right now have been expressed in the interviews that we're hearing from all of your departments. The main thing I want to address is the need for that flexibility. We don't want to hem you into anything. What we're finding is that when people want to come back to the office, they want a flexible option. They want a hybrid option. Nobody's of the people who want to be able to work from home, they want still to be able to come into the office. And the reasons that they're wanting to come back to the office, there are multiple reasons, but the top three that we're hearing are the need for collaboration with other coworkers, that cultural aspect of being able to get together with your coworkers, and then sometimes because there's just something happening at home, maybe the work environment isn't conducive. But what we're finding is that there is a greater need for all of that collaborative space and that flexible space that can be multi-purpose. So whatever recommendations we end up making will include a lot of flexibility so that you have that growth and that sort of change management opportunity moving forward.
And as you're looking at other facilities, other government facilities to give us thoughts, we would be open to that same input on commissioner offices too. I mean, we kind of gave you some ideas, but that's just from our, history of working in the place we have now. But maybe you can have some other ideas that make some sense too, so.
Yeah, sure. We're looking at what your peers are doing. We're learning a lot from trends that are becoming less trendy and sticking for sure.
Okay.
So we'll have recommendations for you.
All right, well,
And I also want to point out, I just in the last year completed a master plan that recommended converting a historic building into a city council chamber. So there's strong precedent for that as well. Not saying that's what we'll recommend. There is a precedent for it.
Yeah. All right. Any other questions for these folks? Yes, Commissioner Justice.
Thank you. When you're doing the study and you're talking to our employees that are working from home, is the conversation having with, we've asked you to work from home during this COVID, during this pandemic, but it's different than saying it's going to be a permanent situation, and folks that, if they're in an apartment or a small home, have you carved out space in your, to where it's, I know for the younger generation, that's just, they carry their laptop everywhere, but for folks, do you have space at home? Is that going to that conversation as well? I guess that's my question.
Yeah, that's coming up, and I think it would behoove the county to have probably some kind of focus group where managers and other leadership from departments can get together and talk about lessons learned, talk about potential policy issues, and ways to build a policy that creates some guidelines, but also empowers managers to be able to deal with specific individual cases where maybe somebody's performance is not adequate in a work from home environment, or maybe other people who are really thriving in that environment have some technology needs, for example. So we want to, I think that would be a great opportunity for the county to get together and do a focus group of some kind in that way.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Commissioner Seal?
Just on a side note, you might want to do that with some of the commissioners and their spouses, because I know at one point I had to tell my spouse to go get lost.
Well, I'm not saying why I like coming to work. I think my wife likes me coming to work. But I, you know, to Commissioner Gerard, she has been working at home, and I find it much better to come work, to separate the world, so to speak. So we're all a little different. I think that focus group idea makes a lot of sense as we go forward. Any other thoughts for the group? Any other questions from you all that are participating here this morning? From no other input, questions from the Stantec people?
The only thing I would add as to contribute to the conversation here as part of our analysis will include valuation of certain properties or buildings that might be deemed best vacated and rehoused in a new facility. So we will have some indication of what those properties are worth on the market through brokers' opinions of value to help you estimate how they could potentially offset the capital cost of any new building program that the county might want to consider. So we're going to attempt to give you all of the tools to make these decisions with as much information as possible.
Okay, great. Nice commercial broker background. I can hear it in your voice. Okay, any other questions? Okay, we're fine. We're done. Unless you all have anything else, we're really appreciate your sitting in this morning and being a part of our meeting.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And before we leave the topic of this, I want to get back to Commissioner Seal's comment. I don't know that it's necessary to make decisions today. I think we're still unwinding. Numbers are getting healthier and better. Barry, we talked about having the presentation by the group that you've enlisted, the hospitals and universities, and what they've come up with in terms of a guideline to consider opening back up and the masking and all of that, which may be I'm not sure that that's absolutely a part of this conversation, but it might be a part of this conversation. So I'm open it up to the commissioners here to think about what Commissioner Seal mentioned. So before we leave it, I mean, right now our offices are closed. We're not seeing anybody at the offices. Most of our assistants are working from home. Most of the commissioners are working from home. If you're meeting with people, you're meeting at Panera, like I do all the time, but you're meeting out. Does that need to change, or anytime soon? Does it need to change when we make changes globally? Are we going to mirror what we do globally? And just, I mean,
in the courthouse.
you're frowning. What's your issue, Commissioner Justice?
No, I guess I don't know. Really, the only question would be the front desk position, correct? I mean, as far as whether we're asking that person to be in the office normal hours. The rest of the commission staff, I would assume, would be office by office like we've always done.
Well, it was more about seeing people at our offices and what all that might entail. I mean,
Well, is there a prohibition against seeing people in our offices? Because I've seen people in mine.
no, I don't think there's a prohibition. We just,
Okay, I was just
our
asking.
offices are closed. People don't come to our offices to knock on the door and hope to see a commissioner.
Right, but if you invite them to, yeah.
I mean, we're all trying to be very careful about all of that, right? So, yes, Commissioner Flowers. No, I'd rather hear from you anyway, Commissioner Flowers.
I think we all use our satellite, special locations. I'm a Kawa Coffee, Panera Bread person. But sometimes what I'm talking about probably requires a little bit more quiet, or the conversation that we're having, maybe, with persons walking by, they may happen to hear, and that's not something I want. I know the office that was in St. Pete in the building across from City Hall.
Days a week, front desk.
501.
Yeah, up on the, I've not been there. Is that still,
It's leased space.
okay, we leased it out?
Yeah, we do.
Okay, so, I'm just saying, I would like, and I mean, I'm sure I could, maybe call an organization or something and ask, could I use a room or whatever, but, I would agree that for persons traveling like from East Lake to get to wherever, that's kind of, and vice versa.
Yeah, but I don't think we have to wait for anything to look for these satellite spots now. So if we could start looking for a north, mid, and south kind of commissioner's satellite office, however that's set up. I think we can go ahead and do that. That's separate from what we're talking
Yeah,
about.
to establish like little offices around, I mean, we can certainly look at that. Andrew's here, I mean,
think you have one in
and,
Vail, right?
it's kind of like Nancy did, working with the, with the folks up in the Palm Harbor area and trying to establish a place that she could work out of. If it's little, an office or things like that, we can always try to accommodate those if that's something you'd like us to work on.
Yeah, yes.
It's always interesting, what comes around goes around. You recall we used to have 3 different locations in utility buildings, and then we sold the utility buildings and then did away with those those
service
individual
centers.
positions, and so now we've kind of gone back to it, and so history.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, I mean, I think what I'm kind of going with the offices is, I think it's valuable that we get together usually once a week or every other week, and we have things to discuss and county business to do. I think with our assistants, even Zoom calls or whatever, even if they could come together once a week at the offices and talk about whatever else business needs to be done, I think that would be valuable. I know I talked with Jewel, and they're bringing their staff back too, to do business. And I think as much as Zoom and team meetings have been great, there is still something lost in the translation. More.
Well, and again, our floor is, and I'm not saying it's unique to all the other offices in the county government, but we have different relationships with our assistants already, pre-pandemic, right? Mm-hmm. So some were in more than others, and there was that. We've had those discussions about roles on the floor and all of that. That's a whole different conversation. I do know that I think they meet virtually once a week or once every 2 weeks, Kim? As needed? Okay. Yeah, so they're having them as needed, and Kim, if somebody else wants to call the meeting, they get through Kim, and we set that up. However, right now, our receptionist is in 2 days a week. Kim's been in probably 3, 4, sometimes 5 days a week. Depends on what, most of the time I'm there, so she's there and we're working all kinds of stuff. But, so everybody's a little bit different now anyway. But, again, I think it really comes back to, do you want to officially open the offices so that people know that they can come or not? I mean, I think otherwise we're just we're doing operations as normal, but a lot less in the office than we were before, so. We don't have to do anything right now. We can just leave it alone and just come back and visit it again. I don't think that people who want to see us are necessarily dying to come all the way to downtown Clearwater, find a place to park, feed a meter, walk up come up the elevator and come to our office. So if they're wanting to meet with us, they're probably going to meet with us out someplace anyway. So, but right now we're not availing ourselves of that as much. Commissioner Long said you've had a couple meetings in, but yes, Commissioner Judd.
I think we need to let them know that it's okay if they want to come back to the office and on whatever schedule, but I think some are still a bit uncomfortable about being around a lot of people, and, fair enough. If you don't need to be there, then don't be.
Yeah, and we come back, all of us come back, that the responsibilities from every office to help with the overall operation of the floor kind of take a different level. So, right now, there's less of that, let's just put it that way. So, and it puts more on the receptionist and more on Kim right now. I mean, I know that's normal that the chairman's office gets more of that, but Commissioner Seal.
And I guess that's where I'm going, with COVID, it disproportionately put more work on the chairman's office. More work on your office last year, more work on your office this year. And we all need to pitch in and help with that. And so that's why I was advocating, even if the assistants got together once a week, that they could even out the workflow a bit. because, with the constant emails that we're getting and messages on all kinds of subjects, it's just been without precedent. We've never had this kind of communication in years
Yeah.
past.
Yeah, no
So,
question, no question
anyway,
about it.
thank you.
Yeah, yeah. I do know that, that between Kim and our receptionist, the volume of communication is, as you remember from last year, is just exponentially grown. So there's a lot of pressures on that. And so again, publicly, thank you for all the work. So at this point, I guess we're going to leave it alone. We're going to still have the receptionist coming in twice, Stacy coming in twice a week. Is that what I'm hearing? Or do we want to do more? I do think your point is some are more comfortable than others coming back. Do we want to start kind of having that once a week requirement so people can start getting used to it if they haven't already? That might be a good idea. But I want to hear from the commissioners because it's really 7 independent offices here. So I don't want to presume anything on anybody. I would suggest that once a week is probably a good thing, but at least to start with. But yes,
So are you talking about once a week in person?
yeah, that's what we're talking about, getting everybody back into the office once a week at least so that there can be some interaction, dialogue, maybe a meeting. But again, we don't have that requirement under normal times.
Right.
So I'm not trying to push things
Right.
on people. So I'm just trying to be very sensitive to what we normally do versus kind of unwinding a little bit from the COVID time and trying to bring back a more business as usual.
Well, how about just a virtual meeting once a week to talk about what's going on and what what kind of help?
Well, they do that
Other
now as
people.
needed, but we don't do it regularly once a week. I presume you could have a standing meeting at some point, a virtual standing meeting, and just to see if there's any, it could be a 5-minute meeting, or if there's some issue that you need to talk about, it could be a longer meeting. I'm seeing a lot of people looking at their things, so we'll just move on to the next topic. I'm not hearing any interest in getting into this anymore. I'll just leave it to the assistants to be thoughtful about having that group interaction more regularly, whether it's in person or virtually, I think would be a good idea. And the meeting can be 5 minutes long if there's not much to go over, or it can be an hour long. So if you can work with the assistants to set up that 9 o'clock on Monday morning or 4 o'clock on Friday afternoon, so you're looking at the next week or whatever it is, I'll leave that up to you and the assistants. Okay, so we'll move on to the next topic.
The next topic, Commissioners, was a topic, it's called Integrated Vegetation Management, but really what this is it's best practices for managing public lands. And I'll ask Paul Kazi to come forward. So Jennifer Bramley, the city manager of Dunedin, and myself co-chaired a committee and we'll do what we always do, which is delegate the staff and get out of the way. But really, it was really trying to give it some credibility to bring all the cities together and create kind of a best practices guide. So Paul Kazi really led that along with the different public works type people who manage lands throughout the cities. He also brought in outside expertise to be able to give some guidance in ways in which we can do a better job. It really benefits, especially he has a larger staff because he has a lot of public lands, but many others don't. And so you have a lot of different practices that developed over time. This is a way of standardizing that and giving some clear guidance in terms of how to better know when to apply chemicals, when to do. And I'll just stop there and let him go through this. But it was a really good effort. That was a collaborative effort by all the municipalities and Paul and his team. And so wanted to present that outline for you here today.
Thank you, Barry. Good morning, Commissioners. Paul Kazi, Parks and Conservation Resources Director. I did want to start with a disclaimer, and I think County Administrator kind of got into that. Even though it says Parks and Conservation Resources Department on the title page and it's Pinellas County, this is actually really a result of a massive collaboration. We had a lot of input and involvement from the municipalities and other state agencies that manage land in Pinellas County. We also had a lot of help from the University of Florida, Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences, and our extension staff here in this facility really were the facilitators of the whole program. So as Barry mentioned, this was a response to public concerns. Back in 2018, there was a lot of news stories going around about large jury awards based on people who were allegedly sickened by the use of Roundup. Brought a lot of public concern, especially with us, where we manage over 20,000 acres of public lands. And so, as Barry stated, County Administrator and Jennifer Bramley, the city manager in Dunedin, convened a group together, invited other city managers as well as their land management staff, and we had a kickoff meeting to talk about what can we do collaboratively to address the use of chemicals on public lands.
Here we go.
Oh, I'm sorry, now it went too far. So the end result of that meeting in August of 2018 was to create a working group of land managers within Pinellas County, facilitated, as I said, through our County Extension Director, J.P. Gellerman, and our horticultural agent, Steve Robinson, to create what we call an Integrated Vegetation Management Program, or IVM. Simply put, IVM is an environmentally sustainable approach to managing unwanted vegetation that is cost-effective, becomes more effective and efficient over time, and focuses on prevention of unwanted vegetation as a first step. IVM isn't just about parklands, though. It's meant to assist with all types of vegetation management, whether it's in parks, right-of-ways, ditches, hardscapes, or water bodies. The three main goals of integrated vegetation management, as we've put together the program, is to provide guidance on the use of chemicals on public lands to ensure that when chemicals are used, the health, safety, and welfare of the public, our employees, and the environment is the first priority. We also want to provide enhanced education and training to chemical applicators to ensure that when chemicals are used, best management practices are employed. And most importantly, we want to provide alternatives to the use of chemicals to manage vegetation and determine which alternatives are effective and cost efficient. So the IVM working group determined efforts should be focused on 8 primary objectives or action items. First, service levels for vegetation categories needed to be determined because that affects what type of management practices you're going to use. We want to make sure safety is a priority. We want to improve our public communication on vegetation management practices and share that information with the public. We want increased education and coordinated approaches to vegetation managers for practitioners. We want to provide resources to field staff in a place where it is accessible and convenient to them, for them to utilize. We also want to maintain a continued review and refinement of the IVM program, which includes ongoing communication and participation among agencies involved in IVM. And lastly, we want to create performance metrics in order to track the effectiveness in reduction of chemical usage. So once a draft program or framework for the program was completed, we reached out to a number of stakeholders for input and comment on the plan. And you can see a list of those folks that we've reached out to and responded. In addition to the organizations listed on this page, there were also presentations made to the County City Managers Group, the Pinellas County Mayor's Council, and presentations were also made at the Florida Recreation and Park Association State Conference, as well as the UF-IFAS Extension Gateway that was held in December of last year.
I see you included the beekeepers, too.
The beekeepers, yes. Beekeepers are very important when it comes to vegetation management. So as far as the next steps, we expect to have the official kickoff for this program during Earth Week this coming April. As part of these preparations, we will finalize publication of the IVM program manual, enlist the participation or continued participation of area land managers, finalize the IVM curriculum materials, begin orientation on the program to area land management agencies, develop meaningful metrics and goals to track the reduction of chemical usage, share innovative techniques and management approaches through scheduled meetings with our other agency representatives, and create a public awareness campaign regarding the program. So in closing, I'd like to mention that many of the principles involved with IVM are currently in use by both county and municipal agencies. What is unique with this program is that we've been able to bring agencies together to share information, make meaningful recommendations, create a program that involves research and collaboration, and is peer-reviewed through the University of Florida, with the hopes that this program will become a template for other agencies and programs. And I will say that I know that there's a lot of excitement on the UF-IFAS extension side, that this could be a model for other agencies throughout the state. I've also been in conversations with Leon County, who are dealing with similar things, and are looking at this also as a model that they can use. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions, and we also have J.P. Gellerman, the County Extension Director, who is also here this morning.
What would you say in your meetings with the other folks, were the maybe 2 or 3 things that there were some differences of opinions on? What, or was it, I'm sure not everybody was in complete
Well,
harmony. Yeah.
that's a great question, because, one of the things that, that we've seen happen in this county and other counties, certain municipalities or agencies will make a decision to, we're not going to use this chemical, for instance. We're not going to use Roundup. We understand through this that there is no one size that fits all. What we're trying to do is provide the latest and best information and let folks make their own decisions with that. So I think there was some concern amongst users or participants that, glyphosate is a chemical that's commonly used, or triclopyr for woody stem plants, but that's a very effective tool. And there are a lot of costs associated with using alternatives. So I think they want to be able to work in a larger group, pilot innovative things, see how they work out, so people, it's not just one group that's taking all the risks with looking at these alternatives. But no, the cities, pretty much all the cities, especially the larger cities, were involved from the start to the end, and they will continue to be involved. But I think that was kind of the thing, is the concern about having tools taken away from them, but everyone understanding that what we want to get to is to use less chemicals, no matter what the chemical is.
But Commissioners, to your specific point, what we also heard in that group was that some, let's say you ban and you don't use this and they go to a green alternative, what was actually occurring in some of the field practices is it wasn't as effective, and so they were dumping twice as much of an alternative product to be able to manage it, and the toxicity of that was actually greater than if you had used Roundup. Okay, so for an example, I only say that is because you have something where you're trying to use a less toxic but it's all about the way in which and where you use that. And I think that that was what the team kind of went through and said, okay, here, because it's next to a body of water that flows, you got to hand, clean it, and there's a cost to doing that. And then in this situation, you can apply these, but it created some standards like that, because I think what the intent was to actually what occurs in the field could be two very different things for the staff that's actually trying to manage, the land out there.
Commissioner Long?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Paul, for this very nice presentation and comprehensive in every way. I didn't see the word sustainability or resiliency in any of the slides that you presented today, and considering how important our environment is to the future of this county and how focused a lot of our citizens are on how we maintain our parks. And I'm clearly remembering back when you did all that horrible, whatever you call it, out at Walsingham. Is there a reason that you didn't focus on that? We did put it in our strategic plan, hoping that all of our departments would include it in their planning.
I'll tell you, and this isn't an excuse, but actually it was included in the larger slideshow that we do for presentations, that sustainability is an important component. And so it's just an editing error from that standpoint, but certainly
You promise
sustainability.
you're not just teasing me,
I'm
are
not
you?
teasing you. As a matter of fact, we talked about that in the presentation to the Mayor's Council group, and sustainability was one of those things that was discussed.
Thank you.
Commissioner Justice?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Back to the chairman's question, though, like if you went to those groups that had input, at the end of the day, the plan that's going to be unveiled in April, are they, we love it 100%, we love it 70%,
Sure.
Or is
No,
it,
I
it
think-
not into that kind of policy detail to where they like the global idea, but we haven't sketched out all the details?
Right. I think they're going to be going back to their cities and using this to help help them choose a path forward to reducing chemical usage. This is really a tool. So there's a lot of different directions someone can choose to go in, or an agency to choose to go in. A lot of people like to talk about alternatives. Well, let's use acetic acid or vinegar, for weed removal. Well, one of the things they'll be able to do with the manual and the online stuff is be able to look at, okay, well, if we use acetic acid, what are the pros and cons of that? Because we may think we're using a safer alternative to a different chemical, but there's PPE issues involved with that. There's wildlife issues involved with that. There's, soil issues. So what we're trying to do is really provide a repository of the best information to help people make the best decisions.
And will we, for our facilities, for our purposes as a county, go through that whole evaluation process as well? Because, I remember when this all started, there was the video of the folks spraying close to the water in Philippe Park, and that really set off people's concerns about what we were doing in our own parks and how close to the water. And I have no idea if we use a gallon of Roundup a year or 1 million gallons of Roundup a year, and whether it's $1,000 of Roundup, and if we did it by hand, it would be $10 million of labor. I have no idea what those differential evaluations that we're doing on our own maintenance.
Right, and those are excellent points. That is what this helps us do, and that, I think this coming year, we'll be setting baselines for how much of different chemicals we use. We'll probably focus on glyphosate and triclopyr. We do have records, so we can baseline that, but the intent is we'll be able to look at using alternatives, piloting some different approaches, and being able to see, are we going in a direction where we're using less chemicals? What is the cost of that decision? One of the big issues we deal with, a lot of our work is done contractually through grants with Fish and Wildlife or DEP. Unfortunately, those contractors, they use glyphosate or triclopyr. They don't have the alternative yet to use where they're dealing with large areas. I mean, other than manual removal, which would be extremely expensive and unsustainable, those are kind of the things that we have to look at. But
Yeah, I guess it would just be nice to have that kind of comparative to know. I mean, you say it's unsustainable, but I don't really know what that means as far as how many employees would we need. I just think I understand the
Sure.
dilemma you're putting in, but it'd just be nice to know what our buffet choices are, for a dollar, and it gets us this with this much risk, $10 million, and we can have a person out there every day pulling a weed. Those are the kind of policy decisions I'd like to see us be able to have.
And we do have tools that managers can use to calculate those, and certainly we can run those numbers, for the board, putting that stuff together.
Okay. I think it's an important conversation. Pinellas is proud of the fact over the years, long before I got on here, that we had the fertilizer ordinance in place and making sure that what goes into our waterways, that's affected the quality of the bay. And so I just think it's an important conversation. Appreciate it.
Anybody else? Yeah, I mean, this is important work. I do think it provides tools. I guess the only other thought sometimes they like to have a system, an approach to an issue so that they can show their residents the thought process that many came together to give. Sometimes they like to have the independence to choose their own path, and sometimes they like others to make those decisions for them, so that, like no Roundup ever in the county again, that kind of thing. That's not going to happen, of course, but, clearly the messaging is the less chemicals, the better. We don't like to use them when we don't need to use them, and then using the right chemical to be effective and efficient with use. I can imagine that's what most everybody came to some agreement.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's what we're trying to do is to help people get to that spot where they're using the least amount of chemical, and be able to look at alternatives to chemicals.
And that document that you put together, the tool document you put together, that everybody is going to have that opening on. Everybody who's felt pretty good about that. Other areas have called you to maybe utilize the same approach. So it's been pretty well received.
Yeah, and I won't take credit for the document.
No,
Just one person.
Right.
But document was peer reviewed from the folks at University of Florida. So we feel real good about the information that's in the document. And one of the things that I didn't mention, but I think it's one of the next steps we'd like to take, is to develop an app that folks would be able to use in the field that would basically, you'd answer a bunch of questions and it would recommend a certain path forward to deal with a certain type of invasive exotic or other unwanted vegetation.
Yeah, I think when we roll it out, it's nice to be able to talk about what you just said, peer-reviewed universities, got a lot of input from the different groups, that you listed a whole group, so that folks understand that this has kind of gone through that screen.
Yep.
It's not just a county official and a city official that, they kind of spearheaded the effort, but, yeah, okay. Well, thank you. Appreciate your time, Paul.
Thank you.
All right. Barry, are we on to the forecast, budget forecast?
We are.
Okay.
And Bill and Jim Abernathy will provide the budget forecast for fiscal years, the 5-year forecast between 2022 and 2027. And I think Bill is remote. Is that correct? I'm sorry, Jim is remote? No? Where's Jim?
Jim will be coming in from the back in just a moment.
I got it. Okay.
Good morning.
And, Good morning.
Hey, Bill.
So while we're waiting for Jim to come in from the back room, we are going to be presenting the budget forecast for the next 6 years. This is something we do as part of the annual budget process every year. It's critical to our ability to be able to predict what's going to happen in the future based on the best available assumptions we have today. And we update this a couple of times throughout the budget process. And we'll have Jim come up and deliver the presentation for you.
Hey, Jim, it's good to see you again. I figured since you were here yesterday, you had your cot set up back there, and now you're here again today. Thank you for your work yesterday. It was really helpful during our TDC meeting, and good to have you here this morning.
My pleasure. Good morning. I'm Jim Abernathy with the Office of Management and Budget, and I'm here with other members of OMB to present the budget forecast for FY22 through FY27. We will be happy to answer questions for you at any point throughout the presentation. Why do we forecast? We forecast because of Goal 5.2 of the strategic plan, be responsible stewards of the public's resources. While the budget is our roadmap for one fiscal year, we believe it is important to know what impacts that decisions made today may have on the long-term fiscal sustainability of the county, which will help our decision makers make better informed decisions. The forecast is meant to show the cumulative effect of all decisions we make, both positive and negative, allowing for changes to be made where necessary or desired. Having this information in advance can help identify both the opportunities and challenges, allowing time to more fully study the choices being presented to us. The forecast has been a standalone document since the Great Recession. 1 year ago, I presented the forecast for the FY21 through FY26 fiscal years. 1 month later, the entire country was virtually shut down, and almost all of our assumptions were thrown to the side. I think the forecast process allowed us to react quicker to the COVID-19 the COVID-19 pandemic that hit just as the departments were submitting their FY21 budget request. We were able to make adjustments to our assumptions to reflect the immediate changes to revenue and cumulative impact these changes would have on our funds. Periodic updates are made to the forecast as new information becomes available. We include the updated forecast in both the proposed and adopted budget books. The document includes forecasts for 10 of the county's key funds. The details of the forecast are in your staff report and available on the Citizens Budget website to the public. Today, however, we will focus on the general fund, the Tourist Development Tax Fund, and the Transportation Trust Fund. Before we look at the individual fund forecast, let's look at how we developed the forecast. Our forecast is developed using a set of assumptions that are applied to current information. We use more than 40 assumptions, with some affecting specific funds such as the change in fuel tax revenue, while others apply to all 10, such as the change in personnel costs for salary and health insurance. These assumptions are based on input from both internal and external sources, including our departments and agencies, the state, federal government, and local and national economists. Some examples of the various assumptions we use include for revenue, countywide property tax revenue, which is projected to increase by 1% in FY22. Revenue from the half-cent sales tax, which is projected to increase by 8.6% in FY22. Revenue from the communication services tax is projected to continue its decline at 3% per year. Since FY13, the communication services tax has fallen $1.7 million from $10.6 million to $8.9 million last year. Total salaries and benefit costs are projected to increase by 2.3% in FY22 which is a blended rate of both salaries and benefits. Operating expenses, which is based on the CPI, is projected to increase 2.3 to 2.6% annually during the forecast period.
Jim, real quickly, on the low increase on property tax, this is based on this current year that we've seen. So because of the big increases that we've seen, you're not expecting as big of an increase next year. To that same point, sales tax, which has kind of dropped, you're assuming a bigger increase because of the drop we've had? It seems like a large increase. So
Correct. It is, just looking at that one number, would be a much larger increase than what we've historically seen.
Because of the drop?
Yes, because we had a drop. If we get that 8.6% increase, FY22 revenue will only be 4.8% higher than FY19.
Gotcha.
So it's actually lower than what we would expect in normal times.
What about on property taxes?
Property taxes, there was, when COVID first hit, we made the changes to FY22 projections, and the adopted budget had a 4% decrease for FY22. Since that time, we've met with the property appraiser, and he's looked at the numbers, and the residential side is still very strong, which is helping offset the decline in the commercial side. So we are expecting, we'll get more information as we get further along, but at this point, we're looking at probably a 1% increase.
Blended.
Correct.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
These assumptions are then applied to the existing budget to come up with the projections in future years. The assumptions are not applied to one-time items, for example, reimbursements from hurricanes or tropical storms or other grants or one-time items that we may receive. In addition to the economic assumptions, we also build in all of the known set changes that will affect the funds, such as any adopted rate changes. This type of analysis is done for all the funds within the forecast when possible.
Jim, yesterday you made a comment that all the revenues we put them in our budget at 95% of what we expect.
Yes.
On the revenue side.
Correct. When the budget, we enter it into our budget system at what we think we're going to get. It then does a 95% of that figure for most of them. There are some that go in at 100%, but the property tax is actually, I think, at 96%.
Okay.
Because of the discount that is applied. And then other revenue goes in at, we budget at 95%.
And on the expense side, we just budget, it's at 100%.
Correct.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Florida's unemployment rate was 6.1% in December, while the national rate was 6.3% in January. Unemployment in Pinellas was at 5% in December and averaged 6.9% during 2020. The housing market continues to demonstrate strength with rising year-over-year home sales and prices. Median sales price increased by 10.3% to $294,000, the 9th straight year of price increase. Taxable values increased by 7.3% in FY21 to $91.8 billion. Since fiscal year 2002, the average growth in the taxable values has been 4.7% annually. As you can see from the chart, our taxable values are now tracking slightly above the historical trend line.
Jim, quick question. When you were talking to the property appraiser, there's been a lot of renters that have had issues making payments, and therefore, and with all the postponement of evictions that have gone on, I'm assuming that it's affected, in some cases, probably some property owners that owned the buildings where the folks were tenants in there. Have we started to see any fallout from that? And is there ways, I'm just throwing this out, is there ways to look at property taxes owed on facilities that have had a preponderance of folks that haven't been able to pay and at the same time have not been able to evict.
I believe that the property appraiser has been looking at ways to factor that in. I believe he's going to be, I think he said he's going to be speaking with other property appraisers around the state to make sure they're all doing it the same way, so that they account for vacancies or things like that that would impact the value that, or how they value property, the commercial properties.
You know, I've thought about the process that we've been through. It seems like it, you know, it rolls to the next level. So it's the property owner, and then the property owner goes to the mortgage holder that are being stressed by the decisions that have been made. So what reliefs can they get? And I was just wondering what we've been finding. So we can probably catch up with the property appraiser and see the kind of information he's been seeing out there.
We have plans to regularly meet with him so we can make sure that we're on top of that, and you know, we find out what their process is.
Okay, Bill, hold on one second.
Good morning again. I spoke with Mike Twitty yesterday, and he did share that it was just a little bit too early to have a lot of that data. If you think about the property tax collection cycle, it was November 30th would have been the deadline for getting the 4% discount. And so there's only really a month and a half, 2 months worth of data the tax collector has to share with respect to whether or not people have paid. And nobody's delinquent at this point in terms of paying property taxes as it relates to the current property tax year. If you think about last year's cycle, they already would have paid in most cases by the time the COVID hit and the impacts would have been experienced.
Understand.
And he's still just getting the data from the tax collector at this point.
Okay, so we really don't know at this point how things are tracking this year versus the norm.
Not quite yet.
Okay.
He's starting to analyze that
Okay.
data, and he's getting a little bit closer to having a little bit more insight. But as Jim noted, at this point, his best guidance right now is that 1% combined impact of the residential strength with the commercial weakness.
Okay, thank you, Bill. Commissioner Flowers?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just going to share that information because I've tried to stay abreast on the eviction mitigation process. And with that funding source, a lot of people have been able to make up their back rents for rental payments. But I believe there was also a fund made available to persons who own property for individuals who were renting and got behind on their rent because there were some concerns that people were getting that money but not, and still evicting people,
Right.
you know, in the process. So,
Yeah.
thank you.
And I think that's an important point. I mean, you know, a lot of our churches that have struggled this year have had opportunities to get some help as well to kind of sustain themselves. So that was kind of the thinking behind it. Go ahead, Jim.
There are many factors that can impact the accuracy of our forecast. Some of these we can control, such as the utility rates that we charge or the millage rate. Others are outside of our control. Either state or federal government could impose new regulatory requirements or shift funding responsibilities down to the county level. The economy may grow at a slower pace than our projections, potentially reducing available resources. On the other side, the economy could grow faster, thus potentially providing unanticipated resources. And since we don't assume new policy in the forecast, when specific items are scheduled to end, we reflect that in our projections. So
Just one comment before you get into the specific forecast. Barry, last year you and I've talked to a lot of residents about it, but we really did an unusual budget process internally, kind of looking at a 2-year budget process.
Right.
Even though we only provided the 1 year technically and the 6-year CIP, there was really a lot of work went into developing almost a 2-year look because of what we were expecting was a downturn, and then we're not sure about the following year, so we were trying to look at it. Any general overall thoughts about how that's coming together, or?
Yes, so you'll clearly see when we roll out the budget for you, we'll show you where we held our expenditures. Actually, the Board of Commissioner Department's expenditures were lower. And then we'll show you where we put the funds that otherwise could have, gone off of the actual rate, property tax rate. And and then now what the new current projection is for that second year. If we recall, Mr. Twitty had actually projected a 6% decrease at that time, I believe, if I remember right, Jim. And he's modified that since then. A lot has changed since then. So we're going to look at what it actually is now versus what the original projections were, and then we'll clearly show you that in terms of making our recommendations. We'll also factor in sheriff body cameras, and different things that have changed since then also. So you'll be able to clearly see that, and we'll have a crosswalk for showing you that two-year cycle.
Yeah, and I know we boosted our reserves in the budget so that we would anticipate some of this, and instead of lowering our millage, we boosted our reserves, trying to anticipate where we could use them this year, and we have found places to use them.
And in a few areas, yes, we're able to use that as projected, but we'll also look, and if the revenue doesn't take as big of a hit as what was originally projected, we'll show you that, and we'll show you options for how we could accommodate that, either through a millage rate reduction, or some other means.
Right, got it. Thank you. Commissioner Long?
Yes, while he's asking questions, I have one. So that anticipated 191 million that we may get from a second stimulus package,
Correct.
is that gonna, will we use some of that to fill the holes that we may see here going through this process?
Commissioner, we're just now beginning to look at the rules regarding that. It does have more flexibility than before, but one of the things we want to make sure is we have a sustainable budget. That would be one-time money. I will tell you what we are expending in, as I look up my bill cost estimates. We're spending $187,000 a week at our sites. So, when we're between our testing sites and our vaccination sites. Some of that will be FEMA reimbursed. We're looking at these, but all those things we'll factor in. But we'll show you what we're spending, how we could get some of that money back from this FEMA money, other options, because there's community needs for that money also, until we get through this. So we'll factor all that in as we bring that to you. But those are real numbers, and they're significant. And right now, our focus is on delivering, and we'll figure out whether we get reimbursed for that on the back end.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it is.
Thank you.
187,000.
I know. I am stunned. That's just.
Well, again.
Is that all coming from reserve?
It is. We have sufficient reserves to be able to weather this storm. Now, you saw out of the first CARES Act funding, we were able to get a lot of it, not completely, but a lot of it reimbursed. And so it kind of replenished us and kind of got us ready for the next wave, which is vaccination sites. So,
just a side comment, Barry, and I, had the privilege of going down and watching the operation down there on East Bay. Incredible. Staff, unbelievable what they've put together, and all of the volunteers who are working there. Some volunteers, some are obviously paid overtime, and some are. Just an amazing effort. I just was so proud of the group, and I know there's some things you're going to do to make the site more weatherproof, so to speak, so people are standing there waiting. They don't have to be in the hot sun or the rain or something like that. But anyway, great job on that front. I know it's expensive, but I think that's obviously one of the most important things that we've involved ourselves in public service over the years. So, got to do it. Got to do it.
We do have to do it. We are doing it, and we're expending some money, but it's necessary. We're not expending what we don't need, but we're trying to build these sites out and
we'll continue
to do that.
We'll continue to highlight some of our staff and partner heroes that are working so hard at doing this. So
and we're gonna recognize them, but I also tell you there's some other pieces that we're gonna add into this. Okay, we've got areas where we can't sustain current operations and this indefinitely. We're going to be looking at some temporary staffing. We're going to be looking at some different things to backfill some jobs that were, people were just being stretched too thin. So we've got everybody from Paul Kazi's staff to pick a department. They're all involved. Somebody's doing something. And if you're not out doing something on vaccination sites, you've got some of your peers that are gone, so you're picking up a heavier workload there. So there's a lot going on, but I only say it for our budget things that there's a lot of dollars going out. It makes me really nervous. But it's certainly needed. So.
Go ahead, Jim, I'm sorry.
Just to follow up with what Barry said, when we did the forecast last year, we had a 4.5% increase for property taxes in FY22. When we adopted the budget, the FY22 projection was a negative 4% is what we had in the budget. And then now it's swung back to a 1% increase. So as the property appraiser got more information, he relayed it to us, and we were able to come up with.
And that can still change, so.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. Thank you, Jim. Go ahead.
So now we'll just take a look at the funds. This year, we're going to have a higher level view of at least all the funds, and then some of them we're going to do more deep dive. The Emergency Medical Services Fund is balanced throughout the forecast period and maintains a millage rate of 0.1958 mils, which has been in place since FY13. In 2022, or in FY22, the fund will use reserves to replace the EKG machines for first responders as they are at the end of their useful life, which is 8 to 10 years generally. For the Surface Water Utility Fund, the ERU growth is anticipated to remain flat throughout the forecast period. Revenues are based on a rate of $117.74 per ERU, which is unchanged from FY17. Mitigation credits are intended to reduce the assessment for developed properties that have on-site stormwater management systems that reduce stormwater runoff impacts from the property to the county system. For FY21, the reduction in revenue from the mitigation credits is estimated about $256,000. The Surface Water Assessment Governance and Rate Study is planned for FY21 and FY22, and a recommendation will be made regarding future rates when that is finished. The Capital Projects Fund is funded by primarily by the penny for Pinellas. The current penny, known as Penny 4, runs through December 2029. Because the CIP is a 6-year plan of projects, the needed expenditures exceed projected revenue. However, adjustments to the timing of projects are made each year to keep the fund balanced and account for project delays. The Airport Revenue and Operating Fund the total expenditures exceed revenue through most of the forecast period. However, revenues from operations are enough to cover operating expenditures. The fluctuations in expenditures are caused by the timing of capital projects. Fund balance and grant revenue is used to fund capital improvement projects.
Jim?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Commissioner Steele.
Before you leave the airport, I have been curious how we are doing. Can we actually see some kind of dollars and cents and how long it can be sustained if we don't recover soon? Kind of a forecast for that, please?
Yes, we can get that for you.
Okay, thank you.
And airport's been one of those areas where CARES Act funding, direct CARES Act funding has made a substantial difference in their bottom line.
And within the forecast document itself, we have a fund review and the pro forma and charts with actual numbers for the airport, but we'll get you additional information as well. In the sewer fund, the current rate plan includes annual increases of 9.5% through FY24 and 3% increases in the remaining years of the forecast. These rates will provide sufficient revenue to maintain reserves and fund capital replacement needs through the forecast period. As of September 2020, there was $113.9 million in outstanding debt principal. The water fund has, the current rates in the water fund plan includes annual increases of 1% through FY23 and assumes these rate increases continue through the forecast period. These rate increases will provide sufficient revenues to maintain reserves and fund capital replacement needs. A 4-year rate study, which will be for FY24 through 27, will be conducted in FY23 to determine what changes to rates are necessary for both the water and sewer funds.
And are we going to have more detail, just as a reminder, not only to us, but to residents how this 9.5% increase, we came to that and the purpose behind it and all that, or is that what we're doing here today? Are we going to look at that fund in more detail later? Or
Not in this presentation?
No, I meant at another meeting. Or is this our time to talk about the sewer fund? No, okay, that's what I wanted to hear. We'll see it later, Bill, right? Okay, thank you. Because that one kind of hurts.
Yeah, those were the adopted rates.
Yeah, I understand. I just want to make sure. I want to revisit that, and Bill says we're going to. Good, thank you.
Oops, wrong one. For the solid waste fund, the forecast includes the BCC adopted 6% per ton tipping fee through FY22 and maintains reserves in excess of 36% through the forecast period. The county's power purchase agreement with Duke Energy expires in December of 2024. In the general fund, the forecast indicates that the general fund is balanced over the forecast period without millage increases. Maintaining this positive condition assumes continued use of non-recurring funds for one-time expenditures and continuing to balance the desires to improve and expand services with the limited resources available to accomplish these desires. The forecast includes the recently approved additional funding for body cameras for the Sheriff's Office. Not included in the forecast are the revenues nor the expenditures related to the CARES Act. Since this funding is one-time revenue and is expected to be expended by the end of 2021 for non-recurring items, we did not want to inflate the results that would skew comparisons between years.
Yes, Commissioner Flowers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Barry, what's the overall goal each year for setting aside funds for reserves? Do we have a goal like 3%, 5%?
We have a 15% reserve. We also have a cash flow, so go ahead and cover the parameters.
Yeah, the 15% is what we need to maintain each year. And then we do have funds above that at this point.
Okay, thank you.
So this graph demonstrates the balance in the general fund over the 6-year forecast period. As you can see, we are able to maintain in excess of 15% of revenue in reserves throughout the forecast period based on our current projections. These projections are based on maintaining current year service levels with inflationary increases for personal services and operating according to our assumptions. As part of the FY22 budget development process, departments are again being asked to find efficiencies to offset any increases where possible.
And that includes the increased operating required from the cameras for the sheriffs?
Correct. We included that in our projection for FY21, and we built it into the baseline budget for FY22 and additional years as needed. So why are we looking for efficiencies to offset any growth? If recent trends continue, which would be automatically increasing for inflation and adding decision packages at the rate we have in the past few years, we can't sustain growth at the same rate we've grown in recent years while maintaining our reserves.
And what this was really looking at, if you look over the past several years, we're spending a lot more money in social service areas. We've increased the number of decision packages. It's just a reflection that if you continue on that growth, well then you would dip into your reserves and you would shrink that over time. So each decision package is independent. It's looking historically over the last several years.
So you're essentially saying if we continue to spend more money, not
Yes, if,
continue what we've currently budgeted, but
that's correct. So we've built in the decision packages that you've made, but if you continue to add to additional decision packages, that's where you create an unsustainable thing over time.
so in other words, we should probably give you direction at this point that we're not going to do any more decision packages.
Or we have to make the choices on the revenue side.
Yeah.
Well, several of us have had 0 decision packages over the last couple of years.
Exactly.
In deference to that statement that you just made. So until we get to a place where our economy is humming again, which is anticipated to be when, Jim?
What I've heard is 2023 was when we're back to a full economy, but it's anticipated to have slow growth in the meantime, assuming no big setbacks.
So I think it would be wise, Commissioner Seal, if we made that decision so that you can continue with your planning and
Yeah.
and we don't get sidetracked. I know, you know, this is an area where there are more needs than resources always. So we have to be somewhat judicious in how we approach them.
It's just really a statement of reflection to reflect the historical trend that, you know, there's choices to be made, and if we continue to do that, well, then we have to make a different change on the other side. That's all.
That effort that goes on, however, does yield some things that we don't want to miss. Or if we do miss them, or we choose to miss them, we've made that deliberative choice to miss, not to address that item. So I would be hesitant to say absolutely no decision packages. I think we got the message here that minimal, if any, but at least if there's something that somebody hears about or sees, that's critically important that we need to hear about, I certainly hope that doesn't discourage you all from bringing that in. Yes, Commissioner Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I absolutely agree. If an issue comes to a commissioner as one of the 7 elected officials, that issue should be brought forward and factored in the whole conversation. I wouldn't want to set a blanket policy of no decision packages from the commissioners today, February 18th or whatever it is, when we just did a $4 million decision package a couple weeks ago for one of our constitutionals. So I just think we shouldn't just have a blanket policy today.
Yeah, I think we have to be careful the ones we bring forward, and we have to be careful approving them. So,
That's all.
But
and as you can see, financially, we are in good shape because of those past decisions.
yeah, I think we want to keep it that way and put less pressures on increases in rates or taxes for our residents. I mean, that's ultimately where this goes, because then we have to get it from somewhere, and our residents have struggled in general over the past year and probably will for a while. As you said, how long will it take the economy to begin humming again? It's probably the same thing with our residents being back to work, fully making the monies that they were making. It's going to take some time. So anyway. Anything else? Go ahead, Jim.
In the Tourist Development Tax Fund, other than our ongoing commitment to help fund beach renourishment projects, the county's commitment to capital projects is expected to end in FY22. There are 3 projects at various stages of negotiations for county support, but final agreements have not been reached on any of those. If or when these projects are finalized, they will be added to the forecast for future reimbursement payments. This graph shows the projected revenues and expenditures for the 60% portion of the fund. For those of you who may not be familiar, we set aside 60% of current year's revenue to fund the marketing portion of the CVB budget, and 40% has been designated for capital projects, either this year or in the future. As you can see, operating expenditures exceed operating revenues each year of the forecast. However, because of the record-setting years of revenue collection, The TDT fund is projected to enter FY22 with over 100% of reserves, which will remain well above the policy goal of 15% throughout the forecast period.
Yeah, Commissioner Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is a slide that caught my eye of how our operating expenses so outpace our operating revenue for all those, especially those out years in 25, 26, 27. That's assuming the same kind of, what assumptions are we making, I guess?
3% annual increases in tourist development tax revenue. And then the normal increases for operating expenses, 2.3 to 2.6%.
Okay. It still doesn't seem to make sense to me, but are we, I guess, and we don't have to get into a deep dive on the tourist budget today, but that number doesn't seem to make sense as far as it is something that we can control a little bit more with how much we advertise, how much we market. Otherwise, we're saying that the 40% or the 60% is not enough to maintain our operations.
Well, there was plenty of accumulated reserves from the record-setting years before that they would use. And if that revenue starts to fall, then like we did last year, they made cuts immediately to their budget as revenue projections were falling.
Right. I just
So-
mean if we were starting from blank, 60% of whatever we get in is not enough to pay the bills.
Correct. But yes, and that's why we're putting this out there today so that we can make any policy or direction to the department to look at that. But this is just assuming continuing operations the way it is. And then things will change.
And then I assume that there was a dramatic reduction in costs, our travel costs in that department.
Correct.
Went to almost nothing and all those kind of, so.
Correct. They made a lot of cuts last year, during the year, and then their FY21 budget, which was submitted, pretty much the weekend that everything shut down in Florida. I told them, thanks for submitting it. We got to start again.
That's right.
And so they had to submit a second budget about a month later, and there were drastic cuts to that.
Okay.
And we've been told we're going to be getting a budget to look at 1 month earlier this year.
Yes, the budget workshop is in April this year.
For the TDC.
Yeah, for the TDC. Their budget will still be submitted in March.
Well, we had for this current or past year, we had operating reserves for lack of, or expenses we weren't going to expend for the $1 million for the sponsorship and those kind of things that weren't in the actual first budget.
Okay.
Yeah, that bothers me. I agree. It bothers me, this conceptually. Yes, Commissioner Wong.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm on the same page as Commissioner Justice. I don't understand how our revenues are declining, but our expenses are going up, number one. Number two, I'm very curious in that red line, if that includes any possible expense for the raise, which is always,
This slide is not any of the capital projects. This is only the marketing and advertising portion of their budget.
okay. Well, still, it doesn't make any sense, so I'll be very interested in hearing their presentation when they get around to it.
Yeah, this just didn't just happen. I mean, this is obviously a trend that we've had for some time. And so just understanding that trend, kind of where it came from to get to there.
Correct. And
It's not.
we've under projected their revenues several years in the past, and they've spent what we've budgeted. But then each year except for this year, the beginning fund balance has been higher than it was the year before. So the revenues are growing. We have them growing at a 3% rate, and there are several of you here who have been chair of the TDC. You've seen that we've done double-digit growth in several years as well.
Correct.
So we've well outpaced our projections and revenues. So that's how it's been able to accumulate.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and as you look at the later years, it is projected to get closer, only a couple $1 million apart. But I mean, I just think we need to understand it and we will. We'll get a better feel for that. Bill, did you have anything? Go
I do. I
ahead.
saw Commissioner Seal had a question, so maybe we can cover that first.
I was just going to say, when I was chair of the TDC, when life was good, we did put in the reserves and started that policy. So that was a change going back several years. Because
That was a good thing.
I didn't want to run into the day like we did where we have a COVID and a pandemic and have to worry about operating our tourist bureau.
I mean, it's just simply understanding why it's okay to run a deficit for the next 5 years. It's covered by our reserves, but if that's part of the plan, then we just need to understand and clearly support that going forward.
And I think, during our budget discussion, we can also have why their expenditures are where they're at
Yeah.
and, why they didn't decrease. I know, they pulled a lot of stuff off from hard stuff to digital. That way they could make changes to the message we're sending out that you can come, but you got to be safe, right? And because it's easy to make changes to things like that. But I think that'll be a good discussion during the budget discussion of why we're not decreasing more. And what their intended target for that audience is. How we're using, as you know, some of it's staff time, but a lot of it is outside consultant time also. And so we can certainly dig into that in a lot greater detail.
I just wanted to comment that I appreciate the discussion that's happening because that is the entire purpose of this forecast, is to help start this discussion so that when we get into the actual budget deliberations and looking at each departmental budget, that you have this context and you see if they continue on the trend that they're on, what's going to happen. So you can make decisions based on that understanding. That's the entire reason that we do this. So thank you.
So in that fiscal year 22, that first year there where you're showing that operating deficit, what's our reserve level at that point?
It's like $31 million.
Okay, all right.
It's right about 100% of.
31 million is representing 100% of the,
Yeah, they are at right about 100% of revenue. So they, like I said, it's not
Okay.
sustainable over several years, but at this point, it would be the plain use of that fund balance.
okay. Commissioner Justice.
Thank you. And we can, I don't want to beat this thing, but the revenue, I'm sorry, the reserves, do we break out the reserves 60/40 or is it one? So
Yes.
this is just the 60% reserves?
Correct. This is the operating portion of the reserves. So the operating share of the total reserve pot is almost $45 million in FY22.
So we're healthy reserves. And it is good to know the side chart there, it's 30 to 40, it's only $15 million from the bottom of the chart to the top of the chart. Some of these graphs can look a little deceiving when you're.
Yes.
But that is an interesting question as you talk about that budget of when there is a downturn, how much do you, what is the core? Is it the staff core? And I don't even know what we have FTEs anymore out there, but versus how much more are we spending on, where do we take our reductions? Or is it the core employees are kind of sacred and then we cut from our advertising? Since I've been on the commission, it went from like 30 million to 60 million. So we've never had those kind of conversations, but it's an interesting one to have.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I would just like, when we come back to have this conversation, if somebody could find out, maybe you, Mr. Chair, since you're chairing the TDC, if there have been any updates on the international travel with regard to what countries are still allowing Americans to come and go, or their citizens to come here, because as of recently, I've had several friends that are going here, they're going there, and I'm just going, whoa, I didn't even know we could start going to those places again. So that would be kind of interesting to know, for me anyway.
Yeah. And we had Tampa Airport in yesterday. Pi was in the previous month giving us a sense of
What board was that?
TDC.
Oh,
Yeah. So we're getting some information.
Good for you.
We'll share that with you.
well, it would be really nice to.
We did send you a couple things yesterday, or today or yesterday. Yeah, so. Go ahead.
So this chart, Commissioner Justice, addresses your question about the capital portion. This graph shows the projected revenues and expenditures for the 40% of the fund. As you can see, revenue for capital projects exceeds capital expenditures each year of the forecast. Because the county does not have any capital commitments beyond 2022 other than the beach renourishment projects, the reserves for capital projects funding program is projected to continue to grow well in excess of our payments, annual payments for the beaches throughout the forecast period. Projected balance in the reserves for capital projects increases from $31 million in FY22 to almost $130 million in FY27. The three projects that I mentioned earlier currently are asking for $60.3 million in funding. That would be $40 million for the Clearwater, the Phillies spring training facility in Clearwater, $2.8 million for the St. Pete Historical Society, and $17.5 million for the Salvador Dali Museum. To address a question earlier, we don't have any specific funding set aside for the raise or any other project that we're not currently committed to. So it'll be a pot of money that would be used for any potential capital projects.
Well, since we've not borrowed any money to pay in the past, and we've paid all of it off in cash, all those projects, we have little reserves, now, and we'll be building them.
Correct. We ended FY 20, or FY, it was like less than $2 million is what we had for capital reserves, but there aren't any ongoing commitments that we have that wouldn't be paid for by the projected revenue, which is, half of the value of half of one of the percents goes to beach each year. Right. And then we have a couple other smaller projects.
And we did discuss yesterday about looking at April to start putting together the committee to start looking at elite events going into the next year. So, and those numbers are reflected in that 60% budget that you showed.
Correct. That is a funding or expenditure item that is a recurring item. They have, this year I believe they have $1 million in the budget. Previous years it's gone up to like 1.5 million. So that is factored in to the projections.
Yeah. So that effort will be going on. Obviously it gets approved by the TDC and then it comes to us.
Correct. It's,
County Commission.
And that $1 million is just a cap. They may fund no projects, or they may fund up to $1 million. It'll go through the process, and then those will be brought back. The Transportation Trust Fund is not structurally balanced at any point during the forecast period. This imbalance has been further aggravated by a recent decrease in fuel demands due to COVID-19. Revenue is collected based on the number of gallons sold, not on the price per gallon. And revenue growth is projected to be slower than inflation because of the increased efficiency of newer vehicles. Additionally, state law restricts fuel taxes from being indexed for inflation, further limiting revenue growth. Pinellas County's population growth is expected to be minimal through the forecast period, potentially limiting the overall increase in fuel consumption as well. Because the projected inflationary increases to operating and personnel costs continue to exceed the anticipated growth in revenue, it will be necessary to either reduce the current level of service, increase revenues above their current projected levels, or some combination of both. At this time, it is difficult to predict how the COVID-19 recovery period will, or how a COVID-19 recovery period will look. Therefore, revenues are projected conservatively moving into FY22. As you can see from this chart, without the changes previously mentioned, the forecast shows reserves being exhausted during FY22. This significant drop in revenue shown in FY27 is due to the expiration of the 9-cent fuel tax in December of 2026. We would like to remind everybody that our Citizens Guide to the Budget website includes some very helpful information on the Pinellas County budget, including the 6-year forecast, budget forecast, which was just presented, video from all budget-related meetings, presentations and handouts from the meetings, and other helpful information such as the budget document, the budget calendar, how the budget process works, and trim notice information. This concludes our presentation of the forecast. I'd like to thank the entire OMB team and our department partners for their support and input to the forecast. It wasn't just me. There were lots of other people who put this together.
Well, thank you. On this transportation, did you have something? Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yes, I am very curious, because I know that surely somebody on the staff has been thinking about it and talking about it. If we have any plan, proposed plan, or when we might have a deep dive discussion on that right there.
This needs to be a topic this year, so we will need to have time during our budget development process to have that type of discussion. We talked about it some and the different choices for two different pieces. This is on just our transportation trust fund, then there's a larger transportation issue. So we need to have that discussion this year.
So that leads me to ask, do we know, Mr. Chair, at what point during the year we will have that discussion? I have a reason for asking.
Yeah, I don't know what the plan is for that.
Well, we're going to be bringing and developing a budget and a budget recommendation. So I haven't started into the budget process yet. I think hearings start coming up in a few weeks, maybe next month. But as part of that, it could be part of my recommendation as part of my budget, or I could work with the chair and we could set up a separate time. But we have to address this and next year's and the 2022 budget. And this is just the kickoff. They do this work to say, here's your revenue, here are your projections, and then that kind of kicks off the budget process to where we start digging into detail in each individual fund and each individual decision.
So I think it's important to, if you're not all aware, you should be aware that Senator Brandis has filed a bill to eliminate T-BARTA. And given the progress that T-BARTA has made over the last almost 3 years since we have hired David Green, and the work that another senator up from the Jacksonville area has filed a bill to do away with the regional planning councils, I am really concerned about where we're all going here with any of our transportation initiatives. Not to mention, we talked about this the other day at PSTA in our our personnel meeting that we had. There's $500 million sitting in a fund over in Hillsborough from the All for Transportation referendum they had a little while ago. And the court has yet, Dawn, do we hear anything about when they might rule, for crying out loud? That money is accumulating, and they can't spend one dime of it.
I haven't heard anything about that case moving forward.
So all that to say, however that ends up, whatever decision is made there could have a really huge impact on us here in Pinellas County. And I don't know how any of you feel about it, but I think it's something that we really have to either take a position on or have conversations about or something. I mean, I had a very in-depth conversation with Senator Brandis yesterday. Needless to say, it didn't go too well.
Well, when we have this conversation, obviously you'll give us a sense of the things that we can control, which might be whatever it is. I don't want to even get into what we can control. But then there are other things that are kind of out of our control. I mean, you hear things about, GM and Ford as an example, in 5, 6, 10 years, moving further and further away from gas, gas cars.
Correct.
Whether you agree or disagree, I'm just saying that's what's happening. So that means less dollars. So we clearly there has to be a policy shift change at other levels, talking about the electric car impact on our roads also. And so how do we collect taxes from those cars that aren't using? So it's a really complicated issue. Those cars wear and tear the roads just like the rest of them. So we have to figure out a different revenue source for these kinds of funds.
Correct. And we're going to need to look both short and long term, to your point. But also remember that we share this revenue source with our municipalities.
Yeah.
And so what is impacting us is also impacting them in maintaining their rights of way and all those various things.
And to Commissioner Long's point, it may be that this is a topic that we do want to separate out and have sooner, so that we can give some of that input to our cities that are also going through their planning, instead of waiting for it.
So
Yeah.
to your point, Commissioner Eggers, it seems to me, based on what you just said and what you said, Barry, it might be very worthwhile to have a joint meeting with our municipalities so that as we're involved in the discussion, do you remember that meeting we had at St. Pete College, Commissioner Seal? That was very worthwhile, at least in my mind it was, because we had an opportunity, all of us, to hear the information at the same time and have a pretty deep discussion on how we move forward, right?
Well,
Say something.
It's always, during these times, you can obviously see how we're spread out in a room this size. So the practical side of it's going to be difficult to do in person. But I understand the point you're bringing up. We have our, those could be Zooms, I guess, since we're not making decisions. But Barry, I do think for us to have that conversation would be really helpful, not only to us, but to our partners.
We'll set that up. I just need time to develop some staff options. Because, part of when we bring something like that to you, obviously we'll bring a revenue option, but you also want service level options. Do you want to, mow at a different cycle and rather than raise revenue, right? So we'll flesh all those various options out for you and before we have that discussion.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. As I was out walking on County Road 1, which I do a lot, it is disgusting, the amount of garbage along County Road 1, on the edges and down off County Road 1. And again, I mean, maybe it's the service level. We don't have enough. But it really, those are the things, mowing those center things so they don't look like a forest in the middle of our highways. But we need to understand that those trade-offs to you.
That is exactly the trade-off, and and this is a gas tax, and you know as well as anybody, the gas will fluctuate greater than a few cents day to day, pump to pump, and but those are the trade-offs. We use 100% of that money for maintaining the rights of way, and so that's. But we want to bring that to you, so we need some staff time to be able to develop that, and we'll bring it to you for a discussion.
Pretty soon, you're going to have volunteers out there cleaning it up and putting it in bags, so we better at least be able to pick up the bags of trash.
And we're also not running inmate crews and things like that. Yeah. So there's lots of things that have impacted, kind of the way we do our operations.
But those are things that you're talking about that we have to.
That's exactly right. And the level of service goes to how many cut. Do you allow it to get 6 inches, or do you wait till it gets a foot tall? Right. I mean, those are service level issues that drive the budget.
Okay, well, priority on this account so we can bring it back sooner and have additional conversations. Any closing thoughts from the commissioners before we move on? Okay. Okay, Barry. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Bill.
All right. So the last item we have is agenda briefing, but I wanted to speak to something because I'm getting some emails and things. I've spoken to each one of you about this, but as you know, the City of St. Petersburg and the Tampa Bay Rays has been in discussions for some time about the feasibility of doing a stadium at the Trop site. There was some recent, articles and stuff that talked about the discussions they had regarding the development of the Trop site and many of those issues. What they really didn't do as part of that review is look at the financial feasibility. Baseball's changed. The way you have revenue has changed. You have TV contracts. Well, and then you throw in the mix that the Rays have proposed a split season, makes it even more difficult. So the city of St. Petersburg and the county are coming together to jointly contract with a firm that specializes in working with cities and counties, whether it be a basketball stadium downtown or a baseball stadium or a football stadium. There's lots of both financial aspects and development aspects regarding how that is done. So there was an article out, that's the reason I brought it up, it surprised me. But because they saw a request for qualifications. So we're issuing a request for qualifications. There's a few firms out there that are, they've developed 40, 50 different, venues around the country and really have the expertise to be able to look at this from all aspects and represent both the city and the county as part of that review. So we're happy to go and do a joint review with the city and with the Rays. The Rays are excited about this also. It puts facts and figures on the table and allows us to maybe come back to the site issues and really focus on the financial feasibility. And that's maybe a way of bridging some of the discussions that have occurred up to this point. So very happy that we're here. We're going to be issuing that today. And again, we'll see how it goes. But I do look forward to having those joint discussions.
Can we take a 5-minute break before we do the agenda?
Here's your chairman.
Should we or can we?
I'm just asking. I don't want to miss anything, but.
Well, can everybody take a 5-minute? Well, I don't think, how long is it going to, about 20 minutes to get through it?
Probably.
Yeah, I
At
mean,
most.
at most.
Depends on how many questions.
That's true. All right, we'll take 5 minutes. We'll start back at 12:10. And then we'll try to finish up by 12:30-ish.
Thank you.
All right. Back, Barry, we're doing the agenda review, so it's in your hands.
All right, presentations. So we do have a partner presentation from Mike Sutton with Habitat for Humanity. And back to Pure Pinellas, Commissioner of Justice. Items 5 and 6 are from the Clerk of the Circuit Court and Comptroller. 7 through 12 are reports received for filing. Item 13, miscellaneous items received for filing. Item number 14, this is for security guard services. It's a competitive contract that we do in conjunction with the Tampa Bay Purchasing Cooperative. So about $4.7 million is ours over a 5-year period. Average expenditure is about $948,000. Item 15 is delegated items for me. Items 16 and 17 are plats from private residential subdivisions. Anything? Item number 18 is award of a bid to Keystone Excavators. This is to make improvements to the ditch modification. It's around the perimeter road at the jail.
Item 19 is just notice of a new lawsuit in defense by our office. It's a personal injury case, trip and fall.
Item 20 is ranking of firms with Starmark International for promotional marketing services. This is for St. Petersburg Clearwater Airport.
Hold on one second. Commissioner Seal?
Who does our PR now, and what is the annual cost?
Kevin, do you know the answer to that?
I don't remember the name of the firm who was in there, but they did apply, didn't make it to the short list, and so they weren't included in the negotiations when we did it. I was just checking real quick to see if there was in the background any information about the amount that we expended in the past, and there is not, so I will have to get back to you on that.
Okay, so we'll email you, all the commissioners, that information today. Item 21 is a continuation of the $4.50 passenger facility charge that's used to operate the airport. Item number 22, this is a production agreement. I'll have to let Kevin explain this, with the Florida Tourism Industry Marketing Cooperative or Corporation for production of life rewards. It's $275,000 is the county's piece to this, and it represents just a portion of the total cost.
Dave.
This is a joint venture with Visit Florida. This is a project that they've put forward. We're co-funding it because it's going to take place in Pinellas County and feature all of Pinellas County locations.
The only question we did a couple weeks ago, whatever, it was a kind of a clear path. This one, I read it 3 times, and I still don't know where it's going to be shown.
That's because they don't know where they're going to show it yet. Visit Florida is working with a number of different platforms to determine where they're going to start showing it. They are going to use it on their website and other places that they've already preconceived, but the major outlets that they want to go with, they have not identified yet.
Because it's not, the other one was they were making a movie and they were shopping into Netflix and Hallmark and et cetera.
Right.
This is 8 12-minute segments.
Yeah, this is more like a video podcast, if you will. It's smaller segments of an ongoing story, and so they're going to look for a platform that already has an audience for that kind of content. We're going to work with them on that. We're very interested in who this gets in front of and how it's used.
If we could just get maybe an example of what one of those podcast sites would be that I can kind of surf around, that would be helpful.
Yeah, we'll send one to you.
Thank you.
Item number 23 is a program, a reinvestment grant opportunity, and this is coming to you from the Public Safety Coordinating Council, or recommendation, and it'll have complex case reintegration programs would enhance services to those individuals served by that program, and $1.2 million over 3 years. And the match is in kind.
Mr. Chair. So I just got a comment, not a question. And I know this is going to be a good program, and it's about, if you haven't read about the overdoses that we are experiencing, and they're significant over last year. But again, this is all going through the criminal justice system, and I know we have a program that's going through the hospitals. I know with COVID that has been kind of delayed, but I really want to see us do more in the healthcare world and in the preventive world, and kind of take some of our mental health and addiction stuff out of the criminal justice system and try and shift it into the healthcare preventative system. And I know when we do the KPMG program, when we finally get there, that will be the big shift to pull us out of the criminal justice system. But I just want to, this is great. I'm glad, many of the people that die from overdose have been arrested because of their addiction. But so great program, glad we're doing it. But I really want to see us do more focus on out of the criminal justice system if we can. Thank you.
Item number 24 is an agreement with the Florida Department of Transportation for highway lighting maintenance issues around the county. This replaces a current agreement. Item number 25 is appointments and reappointments to the Medical Services Advisory Council. Item number 26 are reappointments to the Emergency Medical Services and Medical Control Board.
Item 27 is a proposed settlement in a civil litigation case. I believe that the county attorney, Ms. White, has spoken with a couple of you and will be reaching out directly to each of you before the meeting on that, as well as item 28, which is proposed initiation of an injunction litigation case on a fence issue. And as far as the county attorney reports, that's, again, a placeholder for continuing discussions relating to the redistricting update. As brief news, you all may have seen in the news that they are now projecting September before the data is actually sent down to the states. So there's a lot of figuring out that's going to need to be done relating to that. And I don't have a lot more for you right now as far as that goes, but we have, I guess, between now and September to figure that out.
And there's going to be some really, really tight time frames. I mean, I was talking to Jolie Marcus yesterday regarding the impact that it's going to have on her office, and
it's critically tight, and it's difficult because there's constitutional and statutory requirements and issues like that are going to have to be worked through.
But again, we're not, it slows the process as far as setting up the redistricting group and getting them started, right? You don't start it without the information.
For the moment, yes. What I would suggest is that we not just completely back burner that and perhaps get that ready to go just in case something else changes. As we've seen, this continues to change. I don't expect it to get earlier, but you never know what could happen.
And we're right now planning to bring the redistricting decisions for our group in March, correct?
As far as the appointments
Yes.
to that body,
Yes.
yes, that's correct.
So we just continue with that part, have it set, ready to
Correct.
go with the direction.
It's certainly
when to start, it's still pending.
Yes, sir. That's certainly a valid option and probably the best option.
Okay.
item 33 is a zoning change request from residential agriculture to rural residential, 1.59 acres. Its proposed use is single family residential. No one appeared in opposition. Item 34 is a zoning change from rural residential to R3 single family residential, and a land use change from residential suburban to residential low, 2.18 acres. This would be up to 11 residential units. You did have 27 form letters with distinct signatures and 5 individual letters in opposition. Item 35 is an ordinance change.
Let me just, I
sorry.
thought this was going to be continued.
That is one that there has been a request from the applicant to continue it. There is a provision in your quasi-judicial ordinance code that they need to bring that forward to the board to ask for them continuance at the meeting. So it's going to come forward with the request for you to continue it at the meeting.
At the meeting?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And I believe the intent is that there is a date out, I believe it's in April, the April meeting. That is a proposed date if the board wants to allow that, again, at the meeting in March to continue it out.
Okay. I wasn't
I'm
aware
sorry,
of that.
not the meeting in March, the meeting on the 23rd.
Okay. Item 35 through 39 are all changes relative to our zoning code and our development stuff. I'd ask Tom Amate to come forward and discuss the overall changes that are being proposed.
Commissioners, as you know, we have been going through a review process with the development group and the staff, and so this is the first of many changes that will be coming before you. This is for chapter, by the way, we prepare a summary with all of the changes that we will be sending to you following the meeting. But in here, what we have included is a lot of administrative cleanup, clarifying the language. We also have included flexibility, things like in the past, staff were inconsistent in when they did review of the site plan or when they did the review of the landscaping. We have language here now that we have included that they have flexibility up to 30% to make decisions. And you will find other changes in the summary that we will be sending you related to dead-end street. The development community wanted to remove, we had a criteria that for a wide turnaround can only serve 10 lots, so that was removed. And we included language related to if they meet the safety of the local marshal, fire marshal in the Green Book, then it's okay to allow wide turnaround in some development. So we will be sending you a summary of all of those changes after this meeting, and we'll be ready to answer any questions. Oh, the other items we briefed all of you related to the lien forgiveness. So there are 4 items. One is establishing a cap for residential and also for non-residential property of $20,000 and $100,000. The other item is related to providing forgiving the amount that's currently in place and giving the staff the ability to negotiate some of those amounts. You also have an item in here related to providing the legal department the ability to move quickly when there's a property that needs to be addressed, and they can do that. And so those items are related to the lien changes that we're making. And as I mentioned, we briefed you, and if you have any questions, we'll be ready to answer them.
So this is all part of the development review process. One, to make our development review clearer, easier to navigate, and then also to be able to get properties that are dilapidated or whatever back onto the tax roll and make it easier. We never collect, you can rack up fines and it's $1 million and the property's worth $100,000. You're never going to collect $1 million. And so it chases off people that may be interested in developing it. We always would negotiate that down. But just having that out there makes no sense because it simply sets up a different expectation on the property. Having this cleaner and easier, I think, will then help us in trying to get the properties either back into compliance or redeveloped and repurposed for a better use.
I liked what you said in the middle of your conversation about helping everything to move quicker. So, and I know we've had the conversation before about the review of our development review services group, our building department, and all of the scrutiny that it's been under in terms of the suggested changes and that kind of thing. When is that coming to us?
So this is the first piece. There are going to be additional changes that they're looking at right now. Tom can certainly speak to some of the things that they're looking at, but there are additional pieces that we're going to be looking at.
So this is the first of Chapter 154, 138. We will bring before you following this floodplains changes, stormwater changes, changes related to environmental services, and changes that we want to propose relating to affordable housing. So those will come to you at a later meeting.
Okay. And processing, right? The process that...
Well, the process review, that's occurring right now.
I understand.
And a lot of those changes are ongoing. Some of them have to wait for regulatory changes. but a lot of the internal coordination, the fact when you walk in, we give you a checklist to leave with, those types of things are occurring now.
Okay, so when those are all implemented or, I'd like to, because I'm getting calls all the time about the need for improvements quickly. So I want to just kind of give us an update at some point, what's going on, how things are going, how they're changing, when do you expect changes?
Give us a little bit more time on
Yeah.
that. Obviously, remember, we had an update, and we had the development review group, the private sector businesses that were part of that, and they kind of gave you an update and gave you a candid review, both the good and the bad, regarding where we're at. Part of that, we wanted to see a SELA take place, automating part of that processes. Part of it needs to be regulatory, and stormwater is going to be a big piece of that. Stormwater and highway access permits, probably two of the most difficult things to work through, because our sites are tight, they're redeveloped, and there's always problems associated with those two areas. So,
And if I may add, Barry.
I'm interested to see where they're coming back with those two also.
And if I may add, so the approach that we took is making changes in code and regulation. These are some of the changes that you are seeing. They are coming out of that work. The other change is in processes. The positions, they just closed. Barry approved to hire 3 project managers. So we will be interviewing those candidates next week. And those will come in to allow the department to move into a project manager flow. Instead of projects are not assigned to anyone, there's now accountability in a way. So those positions we hope to interview all of them next week. They will come on board. And you will see a change as projects are being assigned to the project managers.
Okay, well, that'll be helpful. Ombudsmen are always welcome. It'll help get the process going. I just want to make sure that the work, sometimes ombudsmen will run into the same frustrations that I do, or that a developer does. There's still the changes behind the scenes are having to happen as well, so that we.
But it's not an ombudsman, okay? It's going to be a project manager. And part of that is empowering staff to be able to do their job, right? And those are difficult issues. A Public Works doesn't want to give that up to somebody that doesn't necessarily report to them, and I understand that. They want to make sure that their roadways are safe and we don't have a curb cut every 5 feet and all those various things. But having that project manager that can go directly to a director level and resolve conflicts, that's the key to being able to be timely on responses to people.
Agreed.
And I think that'll clear up a lot of those. It won't solve everything, but it'll certainly help do that. We've been talking about that for 2 years. We needed some of these other pieces in place and these process changes to make a project manager effective. And so now we're far enough along to where we're bringing those additional positions on that should really help coordinate a centralized response.
Okay, well, that's encouraging. And we blame you on this next one because we were supposed to be having a meeting this afternoon, Jill and I can't remember who, both of you, right? Yeah, okay. To talk about form-based code in downtown Palm Harbor, because I just want it to be very clear that if this commission has a vision to do something about an area, about something that we try to affect that change as we can. And I really want to have this conversation with these folks first, but we've got to, again, I know things are slow, and we've had last year to deal with, but we have some critical projects at some critical stages, and and along the way, we got to just make sure that expectations of what we're telling people is what they can expect.
I do that. As I've said before, we want to make this process, better and to be consistent. Understanding that there are people that are going to not want to follow our regulations. Okay, and so we got to be able to differentiate those. And I think you'll find some information when you meet with staff regarding that. Our processes, we're going to make that predictable, timely, and consistent in our response. if we think a regulation needs to be changed, well, then this is the body to be able to make that change. And we're going to be bringing forward more regulatory changes, but then I think we'll be able to break that down quicker. Right now, it's kind of all the above, plus the fact that during this past year, staff has seen more permits, more requests than they've ever experienced. And so there was a number of things that caused a lot of delays here. What you're facing up in Palm Harbor in that particular area is several things, and there's some rights of way issues and things like that you can't necessarily resolve. But
Well, we can try to resolve it through development agreements sometimes, and so we don't have to have everything fine-tuned in code. Otherwise, we'll be waiting for, so anyway, we're not here to discuss that specifics, but I'm just saying, that those are the kinds of things that we have to try to, make sure that our development community is clear.
what I really would hope that we get to a point is where you have confidence to where you send them back through that project manager, and that project manager will do everything they can to try to resolve their issues, because that's where it obviously needs to occur, and we can be consistent. But you got to have confidence in that. You're asking a lot of questions because people are coming to you, and in many cases they're correct in their complaint, and so we're trying to solve those. But it's a combination of a lot of things that makes the development process difficult.
Any other? Yes, Commissioner Justice.
Thank you. On item 39 is the part allows county attorney's office to bring litigation without coming to the commission on these lien properties. What are the limits? What's the whatever road guards of what can the county attorney do without coming to the commission? What situations would that address?
Commissioner, this is directly pointed only at, I believe, injunctions related to the code enforcement process. I believe, as is currently kind of the situation, where we have places where we can't very well get to the board in a realistic time frame to move something forward that has to move quickly, that we'll talk with the chair and kind of bring people into the loop. But the idea behind this is that every time we have one of these kind of stopgaps in this process, it slows down that process yet again. The public and the expectations relating to getting things moved ahead. And by the way, the injunction process is not a quick process either. Usually you go in, you ask for the injunction, assuming you get it, the court will give a period of time for compliance again on top of that. So the idea is to try and cut out as much of the time that's within the authority of the county to get this thing moving.
And if I may add, Commissioner, this is, there are situations where, because of the safety, we got to move quickly. So this allowed the attorney's office to begin moving quickly. You always going to be notified of any of those actions. What this is allowing is that they can proceed, and then you can be notified of the steps they have taken.
And that's all I'm looking for is this only in situations of, the building is falling down and it's going to fall down by this weekend and we don't have a commission meeting for 3 weeks, or, because it really doesn't say in here clearly what the limitations are, what the situations would be used in. I'm just looking, I support speeding up the process, although the example in here is that there was a case filed in May of 2018. It's scheduled, it took 2 years to July of 2020 to be scheduled. So I don't think that was the commission meeting holding up that process.
Oh, no.
And so I'm just trying to find out what the guardrails are of what this will allow the county attorney to do to speed up the process without taking it too far to a point where the commission's out of the loop.
Well, first of all, in section 1 sub G, what it talks about is that it's at the request of the county administrator. The county attorney is authorized, subject to professional discretion. Obviously, if it's something illegal, we're not going to move forward with it. But to file foreclosure actions authorized by a special magistrate. So the special magistrate would have already gone through their process to determine that the lien's in place and it's appropriate, and there'd be a due process kind of pre-civil litigation piece there. Second, to initiate injunction proceedings seeking code compliance that remain in non-compliance after 3 months. So this will have been, codes would have gone through a process to try and get someone for 3 months into compliance and have been unsuccessful with that. And then within that section also, we report at least quarterly back initiation of any litigation. So if the board was to say, you know, okay, yeah, we don't want you to go forward with this, you know, we could presumably, depending on, in most situations, we could step back, voluntarily dismiss, and move a case along, but.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I was fine until you said quarterly. And I think that given the, it's not about the people that are currently in these positions, Dawn. It's about this, we're setting policy here that supposedly is going to supersede anyone's length of employment today. And I did hear you say that it would be upon the request of the county administrator, right?
Correct.
So the county attorney would have to go to Barry. I'm just playing because it's today. And then the two of them would make a decision about how to proceed forward. So I don't know why we wouldn't have it on our agenda at our next commission meeting to at least notify us that this action was taking place. Waiting quarterly, I mean, that's a slippery slope in my mind because a lot of fuzzy things can fall in the cracks in a quarterly time frame. So I would prefer that it would come, you know, to us at our next regular meeting, just for information on the county administrator's report or the county attorney's report, whoever, I don't care, as long as we are made aware.
Yeah, understood. And this was, it's at least quarterly, and we could certainly have that language changed, or we can even change it during the public hearing if that was the consensus or the direction of the board. And you know, I completely understand where you're coming from. I think as a practical matter, you would be made aware, but if that language change is something you'd like, that's very doable.
Thank you. Well, that's something I would like. I don't know about my colleagues.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. I mean, it could be put under consent, right?
Yeah.
Just
We could
information.
easily put it under consent or.
Okay. Okay, any other questions? Thank you, Tom. Any other questions? Anybody? Barry, is there anything else?
That concludes the agenda. I did want to tell you Eastlake Road is back open in all lanes also.
Okay. When did that, do you know when it happened? When they
Well,
opened it?
I got a email from Kelly at 12:21.
Okay.
So, you know, just recently. The sheriff's office did set up a memorial outside of their office, and I'll send you a picture of what they've done.
Are they going to do any kind of a service or anything out there?
I don't know. I don't have any additional details at this
You'll
point.
let us know, though,
As soon
right?
as we hear anything more, we will certainly let you know.
Okay, seeing nothing else? Did you, Commissioner Peters?
I don't know if this is appropriate or not, but I was asked if we would consider sending a letter supporting a appropriation request for Miracles Outreach. They work with youth in Clearwater and several other locations for human trafficking. And they were wondering if we'd be willing to write a letter, and I don't know if that's something we do through a procedure. I'm happy to write one on my own, but if you all would be willing to sign one if I send a draft to you, or is that not a procedure that we do?
Lord, is this will be through your group, Lourdes, or?
No. They just wanted to know if we would write a letter of support. Hillsborough County is writing a letter of support to the legislature for their appropriation. And
What is the amount of the appropriation?
do I have that? I think it's $100,000. I'm not sure. I don't have that information, but it's to help 100 children, ages 12 to 17. And I didn't know if that's something we do or if there's a process for it, but I'm happy to send out a draft if you support it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I can just do it independently. It's fine.
It's an independent group looking for funds from the state.
Yeah. In Hillsborough County, it's on their agenda this week, and they asked me if I would put in the request. So I just don't know what the
And they
procedure is
do
to
work
do that.
within Pinellas County.
Yes.
I'm not
Do we
familiar
know
with them, so I
anything
don't know.
about them?
Yeah, it's just, I don't know anything.
So they've been reaching out to, I thought they had reached out to most of
Wanna
you.
make- yeah.
But they work with foster care and they do human trafficking. They have a facility in downtown Clearwater. and they've been established for quite some time. So if it's not something you want to do as a group, I can send you the letter if you want to sign it.
Yeah,
And
that's fine.
that'd be great. If
Yeah,
not, we'll
that's
just
fine.
do
No,
it.
it's fine. Go ahead.
Okay.
Do they have a form letter?
Ashley's drafting it up.
Okay. Yeah, I'll be glad to. I don't
That's a
see any
good idea.
opposition to it, so.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Anybody else have anything? Okay, workshop meeting is adjourned.